Hey there, and welcome to another episode of The Bible. Wait, what? Yes, this is the podcast that unravels the mysteries of the Bible's most perplexing, puzzling, and thought-provoking passages. My name is Rohan, and each session I'm joined by a member of our team at C3 Church Camden, Picton and Thirroul as they quiz me on some of the more complicated, confusing, challenging, and even confronting passages that we read in our weekly Bible reading plan. We understand that reading the Bible can be a challenging and perplexing experience. Many people just don't know where to start, they get confused, and so they give up. Well, that's why this podcast exists, to equip you with the tools and the knowledge to explore the richness and depth of the Bible for yourself. So grab your Bible, take a deep breath, and join us as we explore this week's passages. To learn more about us or to get in touch with us at C3 Church Camden, Picton and Thirroul, visit any of our three locations' websites. That's c3camden.church, c3picton.church and c3thirroul.church. Or you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube just by searching for any of our locations' names. So without any further delay, let's dive into today's conversation.
Hello, and welcome to the Bible. Wait, what? My name's Jeanie, and I'm sitting down here with Pastor Rohan again.
Hello. This is the first time I've done this in like 2 months or something.
2 months. Are you rusty?
6 weeks. I feel very rusty.
I feel
6
rusty.
weeks. You feel rusty?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's been at least that long for you too.
Yes, it has.
You might have been the last podcast I recorded before I went away. So
The last and the best.
the best, was it? Well, let's see if we can beat that today,
Oh
Jeannie.
dear, I don't know. We're doing Deuteronomy, so
Strap yourself in, folks.
strap yourself in. This could be a long session.
Oh, no, don't say that. No, it won't be.
Long-winded.
Long-winded.
It's actually not. Some of the chapters are quite short.
They are short. They're just
Yes.
full of really complex, challenging, confronting rules, aren't they?
Yes. So tell me, what is Deuteronomy?
Deuteronomy stands for the second law, and it was essentially it's a speech from Moses right at the end of his life, right before the Jews are about to take the promised land. Israel's going to go into the promised land. They've been wandering for 40 years in the desert, and Moses calls them together, gives them a speech and a pep talk. Basically says...
What a pep talk.
It's a pep talk. He says, I want you to remember what you've been through, what God's brought you through, because this is now a whole nother generation. This is the children, predominantly this is the children of the ones who had passed through the Red Sea. And so it's a pep talk about their parents' generation. Remember how God has provided for you. Stay faithful to God. And by the way, he says, I know you're not going to stay faithful to God,
Yeah,
but he still
no.
calls them to. And then he proceeds to reiterate many, not all, of the laws of Leviticus. It's like that's why it's called second law.
Okay, so the Leviticus is the first
It's
law.
the first law, which was pretty much put together when they came out of Egypt. So within the first year or so, that first one was put together as they were at Mount Sinai, beginning their journey as a nation.
And so now 40 years later, they're writing the second one. Is it an expansion of the first, or does it change it?
It's not an expansion. I'd say, off the top of my head, I'd say it's slightly less. But there's a lot of things that are almost word for word repeats. And then there are other things where there are just slight nuance changes that reframe up the previous law in a way that is more applicable to what they are going to have when they go into Canaan, and they're not living in tents anymore. They'll be living in cities and towns. And so there's lots of reference to life in urban or rural life as opposed to nomadic life.
Have they conquered Canaan at this point, or are
No.
they about to?
They're about to.
Okay, so Moses delivers this speech, and then Joshua takes over, and then they conquer.
Yep.
Okay, so is this like Moses' farewell?
It's his farewell address, and we'll see that right at the very end of the book, which is probably coming up in the next week or so. Yes, it's his farewell address, and he pretty much bids them farewell.
Bids them farewell with a cracker of a book.
Yes.
I mean, laws in here that just sound so crazy to us.
Yes, and especially when we dig into these chapters today.
Yeah.
If you're not confronted by these, then you probably haven't given them enough
No,
thought.
it gets quite icky. I mean, we're going to have to talk about latrines and all sorts of stuff.
Oh, we are too, aren't we? Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Yes. And
Yes, this is
what to do with
Yeah.
slaves that are captured, and it's nitty gritty.
So that he's talking to a nomadic people, as you said, that are about to become village towns people.
Yes, essentially.
And
previously, a generation before had been in slavery.
in
So,
slavery. Okay. So they've just been wandering the desert, learning their lessons from God, and now they're ready to go in.
yes, let's just say that I'd say they're ready to go in. The reason they've been wandering the desert was their own disobedience back 40 years before this, when the whole thing where they were going to go in and the spies said, no, we can't go. And so they were,
Oh, yeah.
so that was,
They had
we
their
read that
first
in Numbers. They
chance.
had their first chance.
And then around probably the time of the first law, and now here's their second chance.
That's right.
And
yeah.
their second law.
Yep, exactly. And like you said, Deuteronomy is going to be Moses handing over to Joshua. He's going to be giving his final speech. And both he and Aaron, the two brothers who are the figureheads of this time of the Exodus and their time in the desert, will not be inheriting the promised land. It'll be the next generation.
How important is this book to the Jewish people?
I would think it's incredibly important. It was certainly very important to the first century Jews. It was steeped deeply in the Pharisaical tradition. They really saw this as essential. There's messianic promises in this book that the Jews of the first century held to. I couldn't comment on how modern Jews, I don't know any about how modern Jews would view Deuteronomy, so it would be guessing to say what they would do with it. I think most modern Jews, my guess would be, and it is just a guess, that they would modernize these rules.
Okay, because that was my next question. Like, are they still using these laws?
I would think
specifically?
not. I would think not. I would think that at the time of Jesus, they very much did. Wherever they could, they would use these as their guide. They were very legalistic about these rules. But I would think modern Jews, probably in much the way that Christians have modernized or contemporized these laws and the underlying principles behind them, I would think modern Jews probably do something similar. That would be my best guess.
Because as you read it, you can see how some of the things that they say in here would apply to a people who have been nomads and moving into that town life, but it would not apply now.
Correct.
They're very much out of context. I mean,
we're not planning on invading a neighbouring territory and taking slaves and kicking the enemy out, are we? So,
well, no, we're not. And
or is that just the definition of Christian nationalism right there?
Oh, you're starting this off so well. Don't take me down that path. Stay focused to the text.
Yes, okay.
Okay. So, now I don't know what I was going to say.
Sorry, I cut you off. Jenny was just telling me before not to cut her off, so I apologise.
I didn't say not to cut me off. I did not say that.
Not in so many words.
You're twisting what I said. No. Okay. Well, I can't even remember what I was saying.
I don't know. I'm sorry. Let's see what you were talking about there. You're talking about the modern Jews.
Yes. I can't remember.
You can't remember?
Let's just go into chapter 1 and keep going.
Chapter 1.
I apologise. It's just gone from my brain.
You might think of it in the music break.
I might, yes. I'm still racking my brain. I don't know what I was going to say in that last bit, but I do have a question, which is what I've been trying to read or discover rather, when I go through this book. And the question here, it's written in big, bold, green letters to me. What does this book tell us about the character of God?
Okay.
That's my question.
It's a really good question.
Can you answer it right now?
I'll have a go.
Okay, good.
I think in order to be able to see what let me answer the question and then I won't give my argument. I'll answer with the question. I believe this book shows us the compassion, the graciousness, the faithfulness of God, the heart of God for people and his heart for people to treat other people with dignity and respect.
That's a good answer. Do you think it shows God as being very deeply involved in a person's life?
In a person's life?
or in a tribe's life, a
Yeah,
nation's life?
in his people's lives. Yeah. I wouldn't go down the whole. I would think that we need to be thinking of when we're reading about the nation of Israel, we need to be thinking about God's people. So it's what we see as God's heart for God's nation Israel is God's heart for his people today, the church.
Okay.
If that's the case.
Let me rephrase.
Mm-hmm.
Putting this in context of pagan gods
Mm-hmm.
at the time, would pagan gods have written such a detail or given such a detailed law right down to latrines or how to look after people's everything as they go along?
Is it going to surprise you if I say yes?
I can't actually remember what I asked. What was the question again?
Your question was, is it going to be as detailed? Is it going to be, the original question?
Do you think the pagan gods would?
Yes. And well, the evidence is in the other ancient Near East law codes, the Code of Hammurabi, the Assyrian law code, the Hittite law code, which are three contemporary law codes. That, in fact, the Hammurabi one, I think, probably predates this by 100 years or 200 years. But they are contemporary law codes, and they are remarkably similar to this while having some very significant differences around morality.
Tell me how they're similar and tell me how they're different.
They're similar in that you'll read them, and many of these laws are almost look like they've just been cut and pasted from the Code of Hammurabi.
And that was written
That
how
was
long
written
before?
a couple of hundred years or something like that
Okay.
before, which meant that these were the prevailing societal views of the area. Hittites, Assyrians, Babylonians, that part of the world, this was the prevailing worldview. Bearing in mind they're pagan gods worshipping multiple pantheon, not one God, Yahweh, but things like the practices for what you'll do with the environment, practices for family practice, societal laws, justice laws, practices when you conquer a foreign nation, etc. A lot of these laws are similar. However, the Deuteronomy laws, and this isn't just Christian propaganda, this is understood by Christian and secular scholars, that when you compare and set the laws alongside each other, the level of morality and treatment of the weak and the vulnerable, and the importance of integrating respect and dignity of other people into your religious practice and your social practice is higher, significantly higher, almost all the time. Even if each of these laws we look at today, we would see that, than the parallel law. So the other parallel laws are concerned about justice and, yes, if you're a criminal, you deserve, how does a society work? It's only going to work well if there is definitive justice in place. If you're a criminal, you're going to pay the price for being a criminal. But these laws bring in a level of morality under that, which points to God and Yahweh and his higher standard.
Would you include women in that when you said vulnerable?
Yes, absolutely.
Women. Okay. So my next question is, which I've been thinking about, how much of this is borrowed from other cultures and how much of it can we consider is from the Word
Fresh.
of God?
So
The mouth of God.
The mouth of God.
Yeah.
So there's a handful of laws. You'd have to do them one by one. There are handfuls of laws in the Mosaic Law Code that don't appear in any format in any other writing. But there are also many of these laws where they've taken the previous law and rewritten it. God has repurposed it to make it hold a higher moral standard.
So as we go through this, can you point those out as we go?
You can have a crack.
Off the top of your head?
No, I mean, I'm not familiar with the Code of Hammurabi. There's a few that I will know. Like, I know we'll talk about the one about the treatment if you capture a slave woman. If you capture, the enemy, what do you do with the slave woman? I know that one, for instance, is different in the Code of Hammurabi and the other ancient Near East law codes. Like there's a dignity and a respect for that slave. In our eyes, in the 21st century, it doesn't seem like dignity or respect. It seems exactly the opposite. But this is the most important thing, folks, with these laws. You cannot compare these laws with the 21st century. The reason we're sitting in judgment on these laws is precisely because we have 2,000 years of history built upon the teachings of Jesus, which has elevated their levels of morality. The only way to judge the morality of these laws is to compare them with the comparable laws of the time in the nations around about them.
I'm glad you said the word judgment there, because I've been wondering how much, or is it right of me rather to laugh at some of these laws? Is it wrong that I have an opinion that they're a bit silly, am I questioning God's sense of judgment or sense of right or wrong by where I sit today? And I say, oh, we don't need that anymore. Why did he do this? We've come so far from them.
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying there is probably what most Christians do. Most Christians find a way. This is quite confronting stuff. All these Mosaic laws, a lot of them seem either antiquated or immoral even by our standards. So I think it's very easy to kind of dismiss them and go, oh, yeah, that was just all the old times. They didn't know what they were talking about, and then move on. That might get you through life, but this is the word of God, and all scripture is God-breathed. The reason we're sitting here discussing Deuteronomy today is because I felt, as pastor in our church, that it was important to train our people in what to do with these Old Testament scriptures. How do we do them? Because I think just to dismiss them as antiquated laws, we run the risk of missing the Torah, the teaching, instruction that exists in them for us. Because underneath what seems to be an antiquated law that is irrelevant or immoral is a principle about God in each of these that we can learn about who Jesus is and how he is and how we are to interact with each other. And once we drill down below the confronting law, and we can extract that principle, we can insert that principle back into our 21st century context. And hopefully if we can do that, we will be the better for it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like to think of it as like God's heartbeat. His heartbeat is in this. And then his heartbeat gets stronger and stronger and louder. The way when you move.
Yeah, you move through time.
You move through time.
Yeah,
you
move right through
the
Bible. That's good.
Yeah. And so in this, I look at it like, what is he saying?
Yeah.
What's he saying about himself? What's he saying about us?
Yeah.
And the morality is a real key. That's his heart there, because he's giving these laws to people who needed this law at that time.
Correct. That's great.
And he would give us different ones.
You should have answered your daughter's question when she came at me, because that's exactly what she came at me on stage with the other day in our family service a month or so ago. Because when I was basically sharing with her that progression of God, and I think this is not just your daughter. This is a very common thing that people don't grasp. The progression of God. God is willing to limit himself and work with humans where they're at, and step by step move them along the moral compass towards true north.
Yes. Yeah.
And the question essentially was, well, why didn't God just do that? And he could. He could just go, yeah, I'm going to change you all. But to change us all would be tantamount to like a new flood event. It would be tantamount to violating human free will to do that. So we're in the realm of philosophy. It's a really good question. But I think the fact that God is love means that he has willingly graciously given us free will, and he will coax us towards making the right choices as individuals, as communities, as societies, as nation, as an ethnicity, as a human group.
Yep.
That we would make right decisions.
Yeah. I saw on Instagram the other day, and I can't remember the exact wordings of it, but it was something like, don't panic when your child is walking out their testimony.
Good one.
And I understand that, because our life is a journey, and we have to go through this moment to learn that moment. And as we go through each moment, God reveals more of himself as he reveals more of ourselves. And we're like onions,
I like that.
And he peels off a layer of our old skin.
Yep.
And gets to the sweeter stuff. But it's also like that with the Bible. The Bible is an onion. You got to peel it back, keep discovering. This is off track, but it's also not really off track.
Well, no, I think it's on track. Yeah, I think it's really good, because what God is doing is he's drilling down deeper into our heart, and he's graciously revealing himself to us in a way that we can understand. So while it might seem weird, these laws, God's going, where are they? How can I get them one step along the moral compass?
Yes. And also what he's doing is, look, these are laws for your daily life. And when you are carrying out this, remember me.
Yes.
Remember me. I am here. I'm at the heart of it. And not only, I'm at the center of your group.
Yes. Yeah, and you're going to find that because he's decided to tabernacle among them. That's the language of John 1. Jesus tabernacled among us. Yeah. He's decided to come and live among this group of people. And in order to live among these group of people, he has to show them what it's like to have God in your midst.
Yes. And he understands the life around. He realizes culture at the time was was barbaric.
Mhm.
There were tribal wars. There were wars all around the place. So here in chapter 21, he's giving them rules for war, essentially. And also in 20, but somebody else is going to do that one.
Probably already done that. I can't remember. It's too long ago to remember.
So I'll just start reading because it's kind of explicit.
Sure, yes it is.
Yeah, I'm reading from the Message again.
Okay.
I pick a Bible a year and stick
you
through
do it. And I imagine some of this stuff, Eugene Peterson may be quite explicit. So just be aware if it's quite, I don't know, but if it's quite confronting, that's the way Eugene Peterson writes.
All right. I'll give you a trigger warning.
Sure.
It might make it worse, actually, if I say that.
No, it helps people.
Well, I'm going to talk about dead bodies.
Okay.
Okay, so if a dead body is found on the ground, this ground that God, your God, has given you, lying out in the open and no one knows who killed him, your leaders and judges are to go out and measure the distance from the body to the nearest cities. Really strange thing.
Isn't it? Yep.
The leaders and the judges of the city that is nearest the corpse will then take a heifer that has never been used. A heifer is a cow, in case you don't know, that's never been used for work and never had a yoke on it. And the leaders will take the heifer to a valley with a stream, a valley that's never been ploughed or planted, which I find so hard to believe. Why would there not be one in that time?
There's a lot of streams in the hill country of Judea.
Okay, but never been ploughed or planted?
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Yeah.
And this is my trigger warning, being the vegetarian of the pack. There, break the neck of the heifer. The Levitical priest will then step up, which is strange because aren't the Levitical priests just for priesthood stuff, not judging?
No. The priests were, at least at this time, prior to having a king, the priests were the representative of degrees of justice as well. Yes, there was aspects of that.
Okay. And God has chosen them to serve in these matters, the Levitical priests, by settling legal disputes and violent crimes and by pronouncing God's blessings in God's names. Finally, all the leaders of that town that is nearest the body will wash their hands over the heifer that had its neck broken at the stream and say, "We didn't kill this man, and we didn't see who did it. Purify your people Israel, whom you redeemed. O God, clear your people Israel from any guilt in this murder." This will clear them from any responsibility. By following these procedures, you will have absolved yourself of any part of the murder because you will have done what is right in God's sight. What the heck? What was this all about?
Wait, what?
Yeah.
You probably, if you're listening to Jeanie read that, you've probably come up with about 6 questions in your head right now.
Yeah. What were your questions?
Oh, there's so many different things, and I would have to drill. We're not going to be able to do this with every one of these.
Just going to start it off like that. Read it all. This is all weird.
Yeah. The thing in these chapters is that they're little 2 or 3 paragraph laws, principles, and you can read each one, okay? And the idea of these is what we want to be doing is finding the underlying principle about that reveal to us what your original question is, who God is. What does this law reveal to us about who God is? And we can only do that when we put it in its context and then do some comparisons and so on.
So what's your answer?
I think this one is showing I think it's showing that in order to live in a healthy community of believers, whether that's a nation like Israel, a community or a tribe, a church, or any form of human community, I think this is showing that there is a need for the community to take I don't know how to put, what's the right word, take a corporate responsibility for the value of life.
Is this showing value of life?
I think that's what it's trying to show. It's trying to show respect for a person who has died because they don't know how the person's died. They don't know if the person was murdered. They don't know who might have been responsible, and they don't have forensic. We have enough trouble solving some crimes today, and with the level of forensic, science that we have at our disposal, I don't have any of that, and it would be easy. And other nations would just go, "Yeah, dead body, so what?" But this is trying to show the people that life is valuable. God is the author of life, so take societal corporate responsibility for the value of life and own up and own that responsibility and stand in the gap and elevate this victim who, for whatever reason, has found themselves in this position or has been killed or died, so that there is this sense of not a dismissing of the value of life, but an elevation of the value of life.
It certainly causes them to think about the person, doesn't it? And you mentioned other religions. Did they do this?
I'd have to check whether they did this. I would be surprised if they did. I think this is one of those areas where I don't imagine that the other ancient cultures had the same value of life, because their codes and their pagan gods and their kings who would write those codes often were the image of God, not all humans. So there was very little value for other people. In fact, the only reason these laws maybe I didn't make this clear before, a lot of these other ancient law codes, yes, they had values of justice and retribution for wrongdoing and all that sort of stuff. But I often think the underlying principle of those laws was different to the Mosaic law. The reason for those laws in those other cultures was more about maintaining the peace. You do the wrong, you'll suffer, because we need to keep things peaceful. We need to keep things moving forward. We don't want to dishonor the king. We don't want to do this sort of things. Whereas God's using some of the similar principles, but he's trying to show it's actually not just about maintaining the peace. It's about the individual value of every human being.
Because yes, you're right, but it's also showing there's a guilt here. Right?
Yes.
You should feel guilty and ashamed and disturbed by this person's death. Yeah. And notice it doesn't differentiate here. Is this an Israeli or is this a foreigner?
Yep.
It doesn't.
It doesn't mention that.
It's just if a dead body.
Yep.
Could be anybody.
And we'll see that time again in the Mosaic law, the value of the foreigner, the poor, the widow, the foreigner, and the orphan.
And and also here it's the responsibility about that, taking responsibility, which, as you said, you could just disregard, but that would seem to be an important thing for God.
Yes. And I would think that you would find that, I'm no expert, I haven't studied law, but I think you would find if you were an historian of modern law, like you actually studied the processes by which our modern laws came about, they're not that dissimilar to this. Like, this is one example that exists in the scripture. What you need to see about these ancient laws is they're not the full canon of every law. It can't possibly deal with every situation you face. These are like example laws. And they were designed to give you a suite of principles that you could then go and apply to every other case, every other situation. What happens if you find that this person measures and they're exactly the same distance from every town, And you can imagine this happening.
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
You can imagine this happening in a court of law.
Yeah.
Oh, well, who's responsible? Well, it's exactly the same distance. You can see these kind of things. And I think if you study human case law, modern case law, you'd find that it's based upon these principles of drilling down throughout history, extracting the heart of justice, mercy, compassion, value and dignity of all human beings. That's what leads to our justice system, jury of peers, all that kind of stuff comes from, historically, drilling down, pulling out, extracting the values behind ancient laws.
And tell me, a heifer, was that a valued animal?
I don't know. It was like you said, it was a cow. I think they were used for ploughing.
Yeah, I ask because is God trying to show that because people would have valued a heifer, and here's this disregarded body, they needed to value the body?
Yes, it could be that. Amanda looks like she's got a coffee.
Oh, she's amazing. Oh, that's so kind.
You can never say
Thank
no
you.
to a coffee. Thank you, Amanda.
Oh, she's the best. Oh,
there we go. Thank you.
love
That's
that.
awesome.
Let's keep talking like this and she'll bring us more food.
I think there's probably a value. Well, it's specifically saying this heifer hasn't been used for ploughing or something. So it's probably
priestly.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Heifer,
yeah, okay.
right?
Yep, that would make sense. I was thinking it was more that it wasn't ready. So it was considered valuable because it was being prepared for ploughing. There was going to be a big cost to it.
Oh, great. You were thinking that way. Okay.
It could be that it was prepared for priestly sacrifice. It was going to be one that was going to be used in a priestly sacrifice like Yom Kippur or something significant like that. Yeah, we'd have to... you may have done some research on that.
No, I hadn't. It was just a
question.
No,
that's a good... And this is the thing. You can drill down into this level and extract things and go, okay. But I think it's fine to say this heifer is valuable. This isn't just like small change. This is significant, and we're taking responsibility for the death of this person.
Yes. So whoever this person is, they are valued enough to spend all of this time, go to this fuss, and be pulled to a to a stream where there's no ploughing or something going on. They're going to extraordinary lengths for this dead body.
So think about modern day compared to, say, let's go back to the time of the Tudors. There's a dead body found in the forest in London.
Right.
In the forest outside of London somewhere, out in the bush. I can't imagine that at that stage of time that there would be anywhere near the amount of effort given to a dead body in the forest, the investigation of a dead body in the forest in that feudal society, as there would have been even here, or as there is in the 21st century today, where we invest massive resources into, investigation of crimes.
Yes, but even though we do that, what is missing is the collective guilt.
Ownership. Correct.
Yes.
We're always trying to point the finger at someone else rather than understanding that corporately we're all involved in this.
Yeah, and as a town, they're asked to almost mourn this person, go to extreme lengths. And so it makes me ask, why would God care about this dead body?
What do you think?
You were meant to answer that.
I know you were. I know I was. Well, I think it's for me, my answer is that every human being is valuable. Every human being is valuable. And he's trying to teach us, he's trying to Torah, instruct us in that principle. Every human being is valuable. So
he's teaching us everyone's valuable because he already values them?
Yep.
Ah, that's interesting.
Yep.
So in this little weird little law here, are we seeing the love of God?
Come on. That's it.
That he has for a random body? Because he knows who that person is.
That's right. He knows, and he knows the situation. And he, some people go, well, why didn't he just point out the culprit? But he was trying to teach them corporate responsibility.
And care. Well, that's amazing.
What we've just done there is a microcosm of the way that I would love us to learn how to do this with every one of these ancient laws. Because what we've just essentially done is recognized, first of all, it's either irrelevant or relatively immoral compared to our standards. It would seem so at first glance, but then we've drilled down to it, we've compared it, we've looked at it, we've seen the underlying principle, and then we've applied it to our life. So even when you said, well, I love what you just said, I hadn't thought about that. We invest tremendous resources into the investigation of crimes. If someone's found out in the bush today, and we can do anything we will, like they'll uncover cases, cold cases 20 years later if they've got new evidence. I think that's wonderful. But I just wonder, based on what you've just said, it's confronting to me that you can listen to your crime podcast, you can say, that's interesting. I hope they get the guy, and still not take any sense of responsibility that my society, I've contributed in some way or been a part of a society that isn't functioning with that degree of respect for all and value for all human beings. So in one sense, Deuteronomy 21 is higher than our law today. It's a higher standard than we're even at today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you're right. Yes. I saw this funny thing on TV, and I'm probably going to get the exact words wrong, but it was the idea of like, if you take away all the bad things, if you take away all the serial killers, if you lock them all up and there's no more of these crimes, what a poor little white lady's going to do on their morning walks.
Oh, dear.
What are they going to listen to?
What are they going to listen to? No more. Well, that would be my wife. I don't know what she'd do without crime podcasts.
It was a good joke, but it made me think.
They keep her awake on her trips between Camden and Picton, and they keep
she
her
might
going.
have to start listening to this.
She might listen to this. That's right. No, she says I put her to sleep. She says I listen to enough of you at home. Oh, dear.
All right. Do you have anything more to say on that?
No, that's a good example of that. I mean, yes, there's heaps of questions we could say, but I think that's the basic principle that hopefully we can put tools in people's hands so that they can then do this themselves.
All right. So next chapter or next part.
Oh, this is the one I was talking about before.
When you go to war against your enemies and God, your God gives you victory and you take prisoners, and then you notice among the prisoners of war a good-looking woman. Heaven forbid she's unattractive, but
yeah,
it's terrible. A good-looking woman when you find whom you find attractive and will like to marry. This is what you do. You take her home, have her trim her hair, cut her nails, and discard the clothes she was wearing when captured. She is then to stay in your home for a full month, mourning her father and mother. Then you may go to bed with her as husband and wife. If it turns out you don't like her, you must let her go and live wherever she wishes, but you can't sell her or use her as a slave since you've humiliated her. What does he mean humiliated? I know how I would say what was humiliating, but what do they mean here by humiliating?
Took her under your wing with this. There's an economic provision here for this woman who's been captured. There's a promise that this woman would come in under your economic responsibility and you would be providing for her. And to toss her out on the street or to sell her as a slave would have been a normal common practice in all the other cultures. and that is deeply humiliating. But it would be so. This is saying yes. You in this context, you can take her as a wife, but you cannot humiliate her by sending her out on the street with nothing.
Okay, let's just pause and think over the word wife there,
Mm-hmm.
because in other cultures, like if you go and watch the Vikings, or what was that Ragnar show, or was it Ragnar? The Vikings, I think it might be
Yeah.
called. Yeah,
Vikings.
yeah, they just go and they raid and they conquer and they rape and pillage.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of a wife is very different to the idea of a slave
Yep.
girl brought home. Wife has honour, economic provision, as you said. It has a sense of duty certainly at that time. So I'm just asking, why did they make them wives? Why couldn't they have just left them like as
all the other cultures would?
Yes.
Because this is
Because
once
that's a
again
huge
this
step up.
is a massive step up morally. It's shocking to us, but compared to other cultures, this is a massive step up. The other cultures, if you wanted them as a wife and you wanted to take them to bed, you could, but you didn't have any economic responsibility for them. You could flick them out on the street if you wanted to. The
well, if you wanted
Assyrians-
them just as a slave, a sex
So-
slave,
sex-
that's
sex slave
different
that-
to wife.
Totally, exactly. And that would have been common practice. And sadly, it was probably common practice in Israel as well because they didn't abide by these laws. Certainly in Israel's dark days that will follow in the hundreds of years following this, they would have done this because this is the abuse of power, which is the heart of so much of sinful problems. But this is God showing a standard that, and this is what I was meaning by this particular one, there's nothing like this. From what I can recall, there's nothing like this in other ancient Near East codes that have this level of dignity and respect. Even it didn't say let her mourn.
Yes, let her mourn.
So that in itself would be huge. It's showing God once again showing the value of dignity and respect. That this person this woman that you have taken, you cannot just treat her purely as a slave.
No. And in a way that we don't understand, we can see God's desire for redemption in this passage. Even with the shaving of the hair, I mean, that was a symbolic symbolic act they did as separation from the past. And this woman is being taken in, essentially being converted. She's first of all allowed to live, a new beginning. She's converted.
Yep.
She's allowed to then grow her hair and become a wife, become part of the clan, have children, and be respected and fall under all of these laws.
Correct.
She's given like citizenship.
Yes, exactly.
Essentially.
Instead of being a slave, she has been part of the family.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the idea here that if it turns out that he doesn't like her, you must let her go sounds so awful. But if you read the next part, she can live wherever she wishes. She can stay within the community as a respected
citizen.
With all of the rights and free to marry whoever she chooses.
Yep. So what you've done there is you've turned what seems like a ghastly immoral law on its head. And you've, in a few sentences, have shown how, in comparison to the other cultures, it's incredibly moral.
Yeah, it is.
It's not where we want to be today.
No, but
it's certainly a lot further than where it was. It's progressive compared to where the other cultures were at the time.
Well, the fact is, women had nothing. They were either wives or concubines, prostitutes, nothing, slaves. But this woman, she doesn't even become a slave.
No, she's not even a slave.
She's redeemed.
Yep.
She is given full rights.
Yep.
No one's to consider her from whatever tribe she was from because she's had her head shaved. She started again. Redemption, new creation.
Yep.
Who is it in the Bible that promises new creation? I think there's a pretty key character.
Not be Jesus, is it?
Yeah, it could be Jesus.
Yes. This is a new beginning, new creation.
A new beginning.
Yeah. And, it would be ironic with what we know today to say that any woman who's been through that is going to get over her trauma in a month. That's just beyond. That's why we've got to recognise that this is a step in the right direction as opposed to, oh, yeah, you'll be fine, don't worry about it. But I can imagine people legalising these laws and writing them out and going, this is it. Well, you've had a month, come on, get on with it, without realising that the depth of trauma and healing that would need to take place, or maybe it would never really ever take place.
No. And look, we live in a very privileged society.
Correct.
Back then, when you're a heartbeat away from death and war, death in childbirth, slavery, all sorts of things. What she's being offered here is actually the chance to thrive.
Yes.
Not just survive, to
Good point.
thrive.
Yeah. Good call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they could not have afforded the idea of mental health. It was either live
That was
or
so
die.
far up Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Being able to deal with that. It was they needed food on the table. They needed to be able to have a roof over their head. Those sorts of things. Yes.
Yeah. And so how fortunate we are that God has brought us to this point in history where he's actually like, no, now we're going to take the time and talk about your trauma.
Yeah.
We're going to redeem that part of you because we've come from terrible civilizations into the one we're in now.
And I think to add to that, Jeanie, let's not become judgmental or elitist or privileged. We should be working on trauma and dealing with mental health and all those things.
Oh, absolutely.
While all the while recognizing that even today, like in Gaza right now as we speak, there is all kinds of depth of trauma. There is trauma in all kinds of nations around the world where they haven't got the opportunity to have the privileges that we have.
True. Yeah.
Their structures and societies have not been sufficiently informed by these practices, so they are suffering. They're being left destitute and all that sort of stuff.
And I think about that a lot. I think, wow, we live in this world of so many comforts, but in an instant we could be back in that tribal war, back in those civilizations.
And I would add to that,
We could be exposed.
we could be
are.
totally open to who we are. And I would add to that actually this is a thought that came to me as I was thinking about this morning in preparation for recording today. Genesis 1 to 11 shows, Genesis 3 to 11 shows, it's designed to show a downward moral spiral of humanity rapidly going downhill.
Oh, it does that pretty well.
It does that pretty well. And you see the flow-on effect throughout society from individuals to families to nations and so on, to an affected population of humanity. The rest of these Mosaic laws and throughout history is God restoring and gradually pointing us towards that morality, back towards his level of morality. But when I reflect on this, it's actually amazing to me. It's easy for us to sit in judgment on this. I'm just trying to get my words right. But it's actually amazing to me how quickly any one of us can default back to the sinful, how quickly our society will default back. The process of progressively becoming more moral as a community and a society is far slower than the process of how quickly we become immoral.
Yep.
You've lived in Los Angeles. You see how quickly riots and pillaging and, flogging, smashing windows in shops and all that sort of stuff can happen.
Yes.
How quickly people can go downhill. We were just in Thailand enjoying the beautiful scenery of Thailand, and we took a 45-kilometre, 1-hour trip out to Phi Phi Island from where we were in Krabi, out across this pristine, beautiful countryside, a beautiful, ocean with mountains and limestone cliffs and everything. And the whole trip from one side to the other, as you looked out across the ocean, there was dozens and dozens of bottles, plastic bottles, bags, all over the ocean. This is like hundreds of square kilometres is littered with human rubbish. That wouldn't be tolerated in Australia. But what it did is it showed me how, without principles in our heart, how quickly people just, that doesn't matter, I don't care. They just toss it straight into the ocean. And here we are, some of the most pristine, ecology in the world is littered by human sin, human disrespect. How quickly we go downhill.
Yeah.
And this is why we need these principles to help us to be able to move uphill. But we need to recognise the uphill move is slower than the downhill slide.
So quick question for you. If we were invaded yesterday, would you remember to put your bins out tonight?
Exactly. Yeah, you wouldn't even think about it.
No. And these coffee cups?
Yep.
Thrown.
Exactly.
If I have to run.
You don't even think about it because you go straight back downhill. And I've seen this, been inside the West Bank and seen this, and people sit in judgment on, the Palestinians all burn their rubbish in the streets, and they're all burning their rubbish, and they have to. How untidy they are and how disrespectful they are.
Well, many
but they don't have any
countries do.
rubbish collection. There's no rubbish collection. So what are they supposed to do with it? So the beautiful, pristine Israeli cities built inside the West Bank, they've all got rubbish collection, but they're not doing it.
So they don't stand there at church on a Sunday and go, "Does this piece of plastic go in the organics, general rubbish, or
Exactly.
that part. I
And
don't know where it goes.
We should be grateful that we live in a society where we have that option to think about the environment and think about care. And we should. And in fact, I would argue that for us not to do that is even more disrespectful than those who don't do it, who don't have an option to do it.
I agree.
So let's be thinking, let's be grateful for the level of morality of our society that we have while recognizing it's not perfect, and then show personal responsibility and value one another, value our environment, because we have the luxury of being able to do that.
Yeah. And so therefore, when we see a woman who's just come through, she's been... I was going to make a joke about it, but it fell short, my joke, about welcoming the foreigner when she is... in this context, when she is married to the new person, welcoming the foreigner and treating them like they're part of our
family. Yep,
yeah.
That's right. Yep.
So that's what God did in those few little verses.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hopefully, if you've ever dismissed these laws, maybe this is a new day for you to start to go, oh, maybe there's something in it I can learn.
Yeah, well, let's see what he says about the next part here.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused about this one myself.
Yeah, when a man has two wives, one loved and the other hated, and they both give him sons, but the firstborn is from the hated wife, at the time he divides the inheritance with his sons, he must not treat the son of the loved wife as the firstborn, cutting off the son of the hated wife, who is the actual firstborn. He must acknowledge the inheritance rights of the real firstborn, and giving him double share, actually. And that son is the first proof of his virility. The rights of the firstborn belong to him. What is going on there? First of all, the loved wife, the hated wife.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, well, there's two things that stick out. There's the firstborn thing with a double inheritance, and then there's the loved and hated wife. I hope we tackle both of those because I think we'll see something in that. So let's just do a hypothetical. Jewish man marries a woman, and he has a son by that woman. So Yitzhak marries Sarah. He doesn't like Sarah for whatever reason. Maybe Sarah didn't cook the dinner properly or something. And he decides he doesn't like Sarah, and he divorces Sarah, and he marries Rebecca. Very good biblical names. Yep. He marries Rebecca, right? He now disrespects, or his love towards Sarah is not going to be the same as it is towards his new wife. And for all the reasons we've just said about human nature, it's very likely that not just his ex-wife, but his ex-wife family, all that kind of stuff would be brought into that maltreatment and ostracized out onto the street. Think about, okay, look, I keep using the Tudors. Think about Henry VIII and his wives. How he what was it? 2 died, 2 survived, 3 beheaded, or whatever it was, whatever it is. Think about Henry VIII and his wives and the way he disrespected all the previous ones for the one he wanted at any given time. That's the human nature thing. And this is saying, no, you can't do that. Just because you've decided that you don't want to be married to that woman does not mean you do not have economic responsibility for her, your son in that family. You cannot put them out on the street.
This one, believe it or not, is actually way more relevant now than it was even 50 years ago. This has come back.
Yes, it has.
Because we have people who have multiple
blended families,
wives and husbands and all sorts of things, blended families.
Yep.
Yeah, and I have seen this actually play out. I have seen people that I know, the first wife, she's gone, hated, and that family's forgotten. The second wife comes along and they're treated beautifully.
Yep. I've been pastoring for a long time. I've seen it many times.
Yeah. Yep. But at no point here, we should point out, this is not God approving of polygamy.
No.
By the way.
No.
Which people can read that into it. But it's not. This is God trying to clear up a mess.
Yes.
And we've seen this mess in Abraham and Sarah and Hagar.
Yep.
Right?
And in Isaac and Rebecca and
well.
Jacob's wives with the whole thing.
And so polygamy was not his thing because the marriage of 1 and 2 is God's ideal.
Yep.
But this here is making sure that the first wife is treated with dignity.
Yep.
So
exactly.
God's heart, even though that we saw it with Hagar and Ishmael, right? God still looked after them because he still valued them.
Exactly. And that wasn't normal practice. You'd be out on the street. Didn't like you anymore. Out on the street. Sort yourself out. I've got a new wife, new family. Away I go.
Yeah. But we need to learn that. We need to know it.
Yeah. Because this should help us in our society to know how do we deal with blended families and so on. What I often see in pastoral ministry is it's less likely. It does happen where let's say the dad remarries, the man remarries. It's less likely that he stops. Oh no, actually, it does happen. I'm thinking out loud. It does happen where he won't pay. He won't pay the
it totally
maintenance.
happens.
It happens where he won't pay the maintenance and so on. But what I was going to say is I often see where the ex-wife is treated poorly, but the child is not treated poorly. Oftentimes the child is showered with financial gifts and all this sort of stuff. But what that's often doing is it's actually undermining the ex-wife, because the poor child's growing up thinking, oh, dad looks after me, dad does this, dad does that. But dad doesn't take any responsibility for the discipline or the growth of the child. And he thinks he's appeasing his own guilt by buying his child off. But it doesn't show respect for the ex-wife. It makes it harder for her to be the mother to that child. I've seen that time and again.
Yep, I have seen that as well. And we should point out that we're talking about here inheritance, and how it's not just inheritance of money. It's talking about inheritance of family name.
Correct.
As well. So
family estate, all that sort of stuff.
Yes. Yep. So even though that the first son is sent away or whatever, he doesn't actually lose his firstborn rights to the association of the family name and the father's character.
Which would not have been common in any other ancient practices, ancient laws. No.
So this is one of those moral ones?
This is a moral one, yeah. So you can see now this is what I often do. I've said it several times. What I often do is I look at this in the feudal England and compare it with the structures of, well, I guess it wasn't feudal by the time we got to the Tudors, but it was feudal in the hundreds of years before that. But I often compare it, and the Tudors is a good example of that, or the Kings of England, because you see this kind of principle. They would turf out the old family, bring in the new, and the new family got all the rights and privileges, and the old family was out, done, dealt with.
Yep.
So I think, but this is saying that's not how it's supposed to be.
I know multiple families that this has happened to.
Yes, it's
multiple.
very common.
And think as well, if you have a child as a teenager, and then you go on and you find a husband or a wife, you can completely forget about your teenage.
I've seen that happen too.
Yeah. So this is one we can still read. This one applies.
Incredibly applicable. Yes. It is indeed. Yeah. Yeah, and so the other thing I'll just mention is the double blessing firstborn thing.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the other thing that comes out of this. That was just a standard practice. If there were two sons, you would split the inheritance 3 ways, and you would give 2 shares to the firstborn son. Now, I've said this before from the pulpit. I've been pastoring for a long time. I never recommend that practice. How to divide a family after you're gone. And I've seen that. I always say, no matter if there's any possible way you can split the will evenly, do it, because the messes that come up afterwards between the family feuding that takes place is not worth it. But in this culture, you can dig into it, do your own research. But in this culture, in ancient Near East culture, the double blessing principle was very common. And the firstborn blessing principle will be picked up and used. There's a whole Bible Project did a whole series on the firstborn. It picked up, and Jesus is the firstborn over all creation. So God has taken this ancient practice and repurposed it to show who Jesus is. And it's a long process beyond the scope of today's episode. But if you're wondering about why it seems strange, why don't they split it evenly, there are answers for that.
Yeah, and there are questions I want to ask, but I won't get into today, just about Jacob and Esau and all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway.
No, just quickly. Go quick.
Well, no, it won't go quick.
Oh, okay.
Because the rights of the firstborn were switched. And
yes,
things
correct.
Like that.
Okay, so suffice to say, if you listen to the Firstborn series on the Bible Project, they talk about that whole concept. And in fact, God actually, here's the simple nutshell answer. The practice that was alliterated here, which is give the firstborn the double blessing, was a standard practice. God consistently delights in upending that practice. He does it with Jacob and Esau. He does it with Ephraim and Manasseh. He does it time and again. Abraham. He does it with Isaac and Ishmael. So it's a multi-thing where God almost says, "Hey, I know this is how it's supposed to work, but let me switch the whole thing on its head."
Upside down kingdom, isn't it?
Upside down kingdom. So there's a whole. Tim Mackey does a wonderful job of explaining all that. If you want to go down to that into that thing, it shows how while the firstborn principle is at place, God loves to reverse that.
And look at God here. Look at how he's willing to get into the ickiness and details of our lives.
This is nitty gritty, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not distant.
No.
He's super close.
Yep. Deeply involved in what you would regard as normal, everyday communal practices of a nation, of just society. There's marriage, there's family, there's death, there's economy. God's speaking to all of those things.
And now he goes on to get involved in more things, more family things. When
Well,
a
this
man,
one is probably the most confronting of the four, actually.
when a man has a stubborn son, a real rebel who won't do a thing his mother and father tell him. I know a couple of those. And even though they
No names.
and even though they discipline him, he still won't obey. His father and mother shall forcibly bring him before the leaders at the city gate and say to the fathers, "This son of ours is a stubborn rebel. He won't listen to a thing we say. He's a glutton and a drunk." Then all the men of the town either throw rocks at him until he's dead, and you will have purged the evil pollution from among you. All Israel will hear what's happened and be in awe. My first question is, would this have ever happened?
Yeah, that's a good question. Lots of these, there's not a lot of evidence that some of these laws were ever practiced. So that's a good possibility that it may not have been practiced. I don't know. I have to research it and see whether there was any evidence in ancient writings of it happening. But it seems like what parent would do that? You know, that's confronting to me, that no matter how much my child is causing problems, am I ever going to drag them before the court knowing that there's a good chance they're going to be stoned to death? I think the opposite. I think the parent would do everything they can to protect their child from that.
There might be a couple out there, but then they have to receive approval from everybody to do it.
That's the point. That once again, this is back to our initial point, which is this is corporate societal responsibility for the well-being of the society. Everyone's taking responsibility for their actions. And in this case, it's saying this particular child is clearly a hazard to society without taking any responsibility. And they need to learn, however they can. And other cultures would do it through corporal punishment, not necessarily through this seems to be like death. But then that somehow or other this person needs to learn the severity of the responsibility of how they affect not just themselves and their family, but the entire community by their wayward actions.
So where's the heart of God in this part?
I think the only thing I can say is, once again, it's that communal responsibility for owning up. So I'm thinking not so, because initially we're thinking, gee, that seems hard on the man who's misbehaving. Maybe we should turn it on its head and go, the law is for that person who's misbehaving to realise, hey, you need to take responsibility. You can't keep using other people for your personal gain. You belong in a community. A successful community only works when you add what you have for the value of the wider community. Take responsibility for others.
And what do you think of the last statement here? All Israel will hear what's happened and be in awe.
I wonder if that's related to some of those practices in some parts of Islam, where they, there's that whole thing of punishment, chop off the hand of the thief and all that kind of stuff, as if, that's not ideal, but what it does is it puts the quote-unquote fear of God into people so that they recognise that there are responsibilities for misbehaviour. Maybe that's what it's saying.
I was wondering if this is in here because it reminds you that God is in control, that he is the judge.
Tell me more.
That he is holy, that he can't stand evil, that evil shall have no presence in his community, in his kingdom.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
I think that's a good point. So he's elevating the importance of holiness within his people. And I was adding in there communal responsibility, but that is holiness. It's that sense of I live for something bigger than myself. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, yes. And what about the actual act of obeying? Does God ask people to obey him?
Yes.
Okay, so this guy doesn't obey. So there's consequences to the actions. That seems a theme that happens in the Bible, doesn't it? I'm not really making a point. I'm just sort of thinking this through.
Yeah. When you're talking about themes of responsibility for our action or our poor actions in the Bible, moral consequences of our actions, sometimes those actions are seen as direct punishments of God, and sometimes they are seen as indirect punishments of God, in the sense that if you do A when you should be doing B, the natural result is that you're going to, C is going to be the result of doing A when you should have done B. If you are a thief, eventually it's going to catch up with you. Those kind of things, like it says in the Proverbs. So they're more natural consequences of immoral behavior. And sometimes God will step in and bring about and be the instrument of justice. We've talked about this when we've done judges and things. And other times it'll just be the natural consequences of that bad behavior will result in you suffering or hardship or whatever.
Did you notice here that the woman, the mother, is involved in this?
Yeah.
That's strange.
It probably is, actually. Yeah. That probably wouldn't happen in most cultures.
No, she's part of the judicial process.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't happen in most cultures. It wouldn't happen in most Middle Eastern cultures today. No.
No, it wouldn't.
No.
And is the son given the opportunity to repent and change?
You tell me. You read it.
The son of ours is a stubborn rebel. He won't listen to a thing. He's a glutton and a drunk. Doesn't really. It seems that he's already
the fact
been
that he's a
given
stubborn
the
rebel
chances.
implies that he's had his chances, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Yes, I think so. It's not like, hey, you've done it, you've had one night on the town, now we're going to stone you to death. This seems to be an ongoing disrespect and disrepute.
I bet, though, he would have repented before the stoning.
Maybe so.
Maybe so.
Maybe so, unless he's just gotten to the point where he's just so despairing of life. And
They did like a good stoning, though.
yeah. I mean, we've got to put it that it's pretty horrific, that whole concept of stoning. It's not unique to Mosaic law. It's very common practice for judgment in ancient cultures.
What I thought about here was how different this is to the prodigal son story.
Yes. Or Jesus catching the woman in the act of adultery or any of those stories. Yes, they're radically different.
Yeah, and it's almost like we get this part here, this law 2.0, but we're actually waiting for the fulfillment of 3.0, the prodigal son.
Yep.
Yeah, and so God is sort of showing us here, yes, there is a real stubbornness in the people.
Yeah.
But they are still deserving of forgiveness. They can still repent and change and return to me.
Yep, there's always that offer constantly, because I would think the same thing in the town too. Even brought before the elders of the town, there would still be a sense of, well, are you going to change or not? And we shouldn't just automatically assume that he's dragged there and stoned to death. There would be a judicial process, an investigative process that would take place, which would lead to some sense of opportunity for repentance. Otherwise, there's justice.
There's justice, yeah.
I wonder too, if you mentioned about the woman being involved too, I wonder if that shows it's instructing the women that they need to take a responsibility not just for their own family but also for the entire community. Because I would imagine most mums, no matter how bad their sons are probably not going to want to.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's an instruction to her. The way your children live, as hard as that is and painful as that is, that will cause dysfunction to the rest of society. So in the same way we said earlier, it's encouraging the families to recognise they don't just exist as individual units either. They exist as part of a wider community, and therefore your family needs to have a degree of order in order to be able to add value and not make things worse for the wider community.
Is this also giving the women a right here in the disciplinarian actions of their child?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's giving her a privilege that she is responsible for the life of the child, and she has the right of the life of the child, because I don't think any mother would agree to have her son stoned.
No.
It would be a one-off,
it would be the opposite
freakish,
of what you would think.
Yeah.
Unless there's something significantly wrong with mum. Yeah.
But I could see independently a father taking their child and to the courts, but to take a father and a mother in agreement would be a very different thing.
It would probably be pretty rare.
Yeah.
So what's the underlying Torah, the underlying instruction? I think that the way we live must always be for the greater good, and our own sinful nature. When we put ourselves in the shoes of this man, he's defining right and wrong for himself. He's going, I'm going to take whatever I want. I'm going to behave however I want. I don't care about anybody else. I just want what's good for me, which is just like Eve and the tree. And that's what led to the consequences of death for her and for Adam and for the society, and that's what God is instructing them here. The way you live matters for the greater good. The way we live in our church context matters for the value and the life of the church. How we contribute or don't contribute to the church will help or hinder the corporate health of the church community.
And this also points back to the dead body case where they were all held responsible. Now they're all here, again, held
Same
responsible
principle.
for that person's life.
Yep. Correct.
Ah, look at that.
Yep, there we go. We're getting some
Clever.
stuff out of it.
Yeah, we are.
Indeed.
Okay. So let's go to the next part. When a man has committed a capital
We
crime.
won't spend as much time on all the chapters because we're unpacking the principle in
we
a
talked
few.
a lot about why this is written, so the next ones won't go as long.
No.
When a man has committed a capital crime, been given the death sentence, executed and hung from a tree, don't leave his dead body hanging overnight from the tree. Give him a decent burial the same day so you don't desecrate your God-given land. A hanged man is an insult to God. Did this happen in the Bible?
Well, this happened multiple times and still does.
But I mean, is there like one major story that we can...
Jesus hanging on the cross?
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, so they pulled Jesus down for this reason.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the Romans didn't.
No, they couldn't.
It was
have cared
normal
less.
to leave them
Yeah.
hanging up on the cross for days and days at a time.
Different culture, pagan gods.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was why they kind of asked for the bodies to come down, to not be desecrated. It goes deeper than that because when an enslaving people would come through let's take your Vikings example, for instance. I can't remember whether it happened with the Vikings, but I know in ancient cultures, let's say the Assyrians, Vikings, they come through, they attack a town. It would be normal for them to lynch people, hang them up, put their heads on spikes, leave them there as a deterrent to others. So the whole idea was that it was shown as a sign of power that we have mastery over you. We can hang your body up and leave it there.
Weren't there like thousands of people crucified before Christ?
Yes.
Like there was actually kilometers apart.
Correct.
For a long kilometers road, and then there were only a couple of 100 feet apart.
Yep.
Bodies.
So in the time of just prior to the fall of Jerusalem, yes, the Romans were crucifying thousands. Josephus talks about that for this deterrent reason.
Yep.
And so isn't that interesting that God is saying, don't do that? You know, do not under any circumstances leave a body up there because you are dishonoring the value of human life. So once again, he's elevating the value of life.
Yeah, well, he didn't like the dead body out in between the cities, so now he doesn't like it hanging on the tree. We have to respect and consider the life.
Yep.
Because that life is valued to someone. To who?
To God and therefore to us. So there's a story in... we might do it when we do David in a month or two's time because I think it's when David's king. There's a story, which is a really strange story, about how when Saul hadn't treated the Gibeonites well, they said, we don't want to, basically, we want 7 of Saul's relatives to be killed to make appeasement for what Saul had done.
Yeah.
Horrific story. And essentially they do. They take these bodies. David crazily shows how it's progressive, this revelation. David allows for these 7 descendants of Saul to be killed and basically hung out for the entire harvest. And one of the mums sits there and shoos away all the wild animals all harvest time. But that was a direct violation of the Mosaic law, which said don't do that. So David either hadn't fully come to that, or it was a progressive revelation for him. But it's an example of how 200 years after this, 250 years after this, they're still not doing it all.
Yeah. Or as a king, he can just do what he wants.
Or as a king, he can do what he wants.
So why is it an insult? And why did Paul use this in Galatians 3:13?
Galatians 3:13.
Yeah,
Cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why are they cursed? Or why is it an insult, that word there?
I think it's the value of life, but I've never really given it much more thought than God's trying to show that there's a value in life. But I don't know. What have you got?
Nothing. It was just a question. I just read it then. A hanged man is an insult to God.
Yes. I don't think it's specifically... It may not specifically be talking about the hanged man as more so about the defilement, says here, the defilement of the land, leaving the person out, the value of humans. What's the moment?
I just thought...
She just went,
nothing's wrong. I just thought, well, aren't trees meant to be life givers?
Yeah.
The tree of life.
Yep.
And here you hung a dead body on a tree, or a body that's dying on a tree.
Yep.
Is it somehow connected to that?
I think it is.
Life, tree, giving, fruit. And here you've hung death on fruit.
on something that's supposed to bring life. Yep, I reckon that there is some link there. I'm not a scholar, but
Yeah, because the idea of death on Christ, Christ is meant to bring life. Yeah, we have given death on him too. I can see that linking.
yes. So that's what Paul's getting at, is that now Jesus is cursed by being hung on a tree. Jesus is this man. He's this man in that sense that he's been hung up in our place.
Except he didn't commit a capital crime.
Except he didn't commit a capital crime, but he stood in the place of one who did, which is
Yes.
all of us, because
Yeah.
we have all committed crimes, a sinful nature. All of humanity is guilty of a capital offence, if you like, in that sense. Our sin makes us guilty of capital offences, but Jesus took that capital offence for us.
This is a tricky one. It's hard because when you put it in the context of Jesus, it's easy to get emotional. But when you take Jesus away from it, it reads strangely. But the idea here, where is God? The fact that, or who is God, the heart of God, that he can be insulted by us.
I see.
That's something to think about. Can we do we hurt the heart of God by our actions?
I think the scriptures make that very clear that yes, we do, because God is a compassionate, emotional being. We get our emotion from Him. He is compassionate and emotional, and for us to disrespect that hurts Him. In the same way that when someone disrespects us, it hurts us. Exactly the same way.
So when we devalue a life, that hurts God.
Yes.
Can we say the same thing if we devalue our own life? It hurts God.
Yes. Yes, with a couple of caveats. Obviously, this has been taken to the extreme where it would say, talk about a trigger warning, talk about suicide, where it would be said, there's been times in history where suicide was seen as an offence. That's way down the other spectrum because there's all kinds of emotional, mental health issues. That's not what God would say. But if we don't respect ourselves enough to allow God to reveal His identity in us, and we choose to continually ignore what God says about us and our value, our intrinsic value, and disrespect that, then I think that does grieve God's heart.
And what you just said then about suicide, is this the verse that people have used to condemn people who have taken their own lives? Like, because normally you would, not normally, but people would have done it on a tree.
I don't know about that. I would say that this is a big part of the ongoing debate that rages around whether or not capital punishment still is something that should take place or not. Certain states in this United States still have capital punishment, and there are Christians who believe capital punishment is the right thing to do. I don't personally believe that. I know the arguments, but I'm the opposite of that. I'm not in favour of capital punishment. So I would think the capital punishment component. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the standard practice for people taking their own lives would have been in this era. Would it have been hanging themselves on a tree? Would it have been swords? Would it have been starvation? I don't know.
Yeah, could be any of those
Could
things.
be any of those things.
But my point being, I think this has been used to condemn people.
Yeah,
People have manipulated
it's possible
this little
this scripture
part.
is part of that. I don't know. I'm just saying I don't know if this one has been, but it would make sense that it has been. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
what a terrific conversation.
That's a pretty heavy conversation,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
I didn't expect it to be so morbid.
But no, that's worthy of some deeper thought, I think.
All right. Well, that's the end of that chapter.
Wow, one done.
One done, but I think I really enjoyed talking about all that stuff.
Digging it through.
Yeah.
All
All right,
right.
let's keep digging. So here we are in 22, and this is a collection of regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to read them all word for word. I wanted to on the last one just to really break it down, to set up the heart of God, to set up the investigation of the heart of God, rather.
There was 4 or 5
Yeah.
case law
Yes.
examples there, wasn't there?
Yeah, and they were in depth involving humans and things. But now we're going to switch to things like oxen
Mm-hmm.
and
Property,
sort of,
environment.
property. Yes. So God doesn't stop just with the human life or the importance of humans, he switches it here to sheep or oxen, or ox rather. And chapter 22 starts off, if you see your kinsman's ox or sheep wandering off loose, don't look the other way as if you didn't see it. Return it promptly. And if you find it injured along the way, don't look the other way. Help the donkey or ox this time get up and get on its way. Why is this important? Or even here, clothing here, do the same if it's a piece of clothing. Anything you find basically that doesn't belong to you, belongs to your fellow Israelite, return it. Don't look the other way as if you didn't see it.
Don't as if you didn't see it. So I like the NLT finishes verse 3 with, don't ignore your responsibility.
Ah, that's good. Why is this important to God?
For all the same reasons we just said. This is valuing the dignity and the property and the ownership of other people. So there's two levels. I think first and foremost we're valuing another person in our community enough as if their property is our property. So we're not stealing from them. We are actually returning to them. We are seeing that their loss is our loss. So that shows that high level of dignity and respect. And I would say the second level is it's the animal themselves. In the case of the ox or sheep, that you have enough, or the goat, you have enough dignity and respect for the animal that you don't leave the animal out there to die. I mean, these are domesticated animals. They're not going to survive out in the wild. So there's two levels there. There's a story yesterday with our son Jeremiah. He has a cat at his house that is his cat. But he also has another cat. They have another cat, the boys at their house, which is it's not a stray. They reckon it was being looked after up the road, but it basically lives in their yard and comes inside his ensuite window and lives on his floor and all that sort of stuff. But it's not his cat. They feed it a bit. Anyway, this cat had an injury yesterday, and Jeremiah rang Jill and said, "I want to take this cat to the vet because we don't know who owns it. It spends most of the time at our house." So my son Jeremiah went and bought a cat cage and took him down to the vet and paid $180 to get him fixed up, even though he's not our cat. And I'm just thinking about that in light of what
lovely.
We're talking about here. Yeah. This is what we're talking about. This is the taking responsibility beyond what is our property.
Yeah. I love that story about Jeremiah because I probably would have done the opposite.
You would have done the opposite.
I would have thought that limping leg is not $180. It's going to increase to $1,800.
Well, there is a chance that he's got some antibiotics. There is a chance that it might require an operation or something. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I don't know that we'll necessarily be able to do that, but at this stage, it shows that heart for someone else's property or the value of that animal. He's going, someone's got to care for this animal, and we don't know who he is.
I love that. You reminded me, I read this poem from Banjo Patterson the other day, and he's talking about cats, and he describes cats as either, and usually both, love makers or fighters.
That's about right.
Yeah.
It's a good
and
way
at
to
night,
put it.
they just, they're inside all day just lying around, and then they go outside at night and just put on a show.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's why most councils say you're not allowed to have them outside anymore at night.
Yeah. Oh, that's a segue.
Reason.
But it could have been a cat in this case.
It could have been a cat.
Deuteronomy
and the principle
here.
is the respect for the animal and the respect for the neighbour's property.
But it also widens it, doesn't it? It's the whole responsibility is on the community to look after these animals. So animals should be able to wander free within the community because no one will harm them. They will be returned and looked after and valued as if
Wouldn't
they're
that be amazing?
Yeah,
in an ideal society, if you didn't have to lock your doors and you didn't have to do those things because there was a community of people that respected one another's property, didn't take for themselves, honoured the wealth of others and recognised their well-being is our well-being.
And
what a beautiful
didn't
picture.
covet as well.
Didn't covet.
Because you might only have, I don't know, what's less of a value, a sheep maybe, and your neighbour has oxen and you'd rather have oxen. But no, even though you may be coveting that wealth or coveting your neighbour's clothes, you return them.
Absolutely. What a beautiful picture of a functional society. But human nature tells us that doesn't happen. I heard a pastor say once, if we were to work out how much of our economy is based around preventing sin,
oh, wow,
we would realise how much of a problem sin is. Security, laws, justice, rules, police force, etc., etc., etc. Imagine how much of how would economy be different if humans did this?
Yeah.
It would look radically different.
It would.
Yeah. How much more would we have to be able to invest into society's good, where we spend so much of our money investing into keeping society at least some level of morality.
What
justice.
you're talking about there is the kingdom of God.
Yes, that's
and we
right.
know that's not
That's
here
not
yet
here
because
yet.
we have to pray for that to
And
come
yet,
in. Yeah.
we need to have we the church should be a microcosm of this. So in the church, we should value and respect one another and stand up for one another and return each other's property. That's what Paul's vision for the church was, that they would be the microcosm of Deuteronomy 22. We're just reading.
Yes. Oh, you took my thought again.
Sorry.
Yes. Okay. That's excellent. I love what you said there, but I was trying to bring it back to the point here that God cares for the animals as well.
Yep.
And in the kingdom of God, animals, what's that famous line? The sheep will lie down with the lion or something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But animals should be valued and respected.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, they're part of God's nature. We need to treat them with respect.
Was that a common law or was that, did pagan religions do that?
I did look that one up actually when I was preparing for this. Now, to see whether or not that was part of it. I'll pause it and find out. Okay, I did look this up. I mean, this is not doing any research and scholarly insight, but this was just the response I got when I popped it into ChatGPT to just see. So the ancient. Well, I just wanted to get a quick answer to it because I wanted to prepare. So you'll have to take this as unverified.
Okay.
But it says in other ancient Near East comparisons, there are similar care for animal laws, although they are less explicit, but they're more implied in agricultural laws. Deuteronomy uniquely highlights compassion towards animals, reflecting a broader ethical concern.
Right, okay. Ethical, moral concern.
Yes, for the animals
for
themselves.
the animals.
Yes.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
so,
a good one.
I'd have to go and find out what evidence that was based on, but that would be a fairly accurate assumption, I'm assuming.
All right, well, that's a good one.
Mm.
Now, let's read verse 5 here because this is just wacky. It's like wacky tobacco, wacky Wednesday
yes.
stuff.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
It's wacky to us.
It is wacky to us, and Christian communities have tried to wrestle with this one as well.
I know. Yeah, okay. A woman must not wear a man's clothing, nor a man wear woman's clothing. This kind of thing is an abomination to God, your God. Let's first of all talk about abomination. That suggests a righteous thing, right? Like it's priestly or something. An abomination is
The opposite of that?
Yes.
It's
yes.
disrespectfulness. Is that what you mean?
Yep. You can keep talking. What are you going to say when I find that little quote?
Okay. I think what we've done is we have often made a big deal about whether the literal interpretation of should a woman be wearing jeans and should men have long hair and should all these sorts of other things come into it. Once again, I think we do better to drill down below that and go, what's the underlying Torah? What's the underlying principle that's here? And I think if we fit it into the context of what Deuteronomy is about, it's about how to establish God's kingdom on earth, how to establish God's values. We've just seen before, treat others with respect, honor them. Could it just be that this is about making sure that within the context of that society, in order for the society to work, have honor and respect for the various roles that make the community work as a whole? This isn't a moral judgment on whether women should be in the home and men should be out on the farm. It's not a moral judgment about that. It's more about a moral judgment of do what you can to make the society as functional as it can be, while all the while understanding that over time and we are in a position now where women can work and women should work and all those sorts of things, and we've come a long way towards where the ideal is. But I think the underlying Torah is take responsibility for the good and the good of the community and fulfill your part. Don't presume to shirk your responsibility and do something just because you want to do it.
All right. So are you saying this is actually speaking about more than clothing? It's talking about gender roles?
I would say
Or should we
in
read
that
it as
context,
literal?
gender roles.
Okay.
But don't then take gender roles and put them into the 21st century context where, you can't have, I can think of a few preachers over the time that have said, women's place is in a home, men has to earn them, that's your role. I think
over time, they still say this.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm saying there are some preachers who still say this. I would pull back on that. I don't think that's the problem. If a woman can earn money and dad wants to be a house dad, I'm all for that. Whatever the case might be, forget about that. So I would extract gender roles and just go, what are the roles within the given society that you have that add value to the general society, to the wider society? So in this culture, women wouldn't have gone to war. Women would have been homemakers. Women would have done those things. And for a woman to go to war may have actually been detrimental to the value of the society at the time. The Vikings, the women did go to war. They were part of it. The culture had changed. But within a given society, what role do I have that adds value to the wider society? That's what God is saying. Don't shirk that responsibility.
I'm glad you mentioned war there. And I'll just read this part here. Most commentators, this is my note, regard this verse as a prohibition of pagan religious practice in which gender roles were reversed.
Yes.
My first note.
Yep.
And the word abomination usually refers to religious abuses.
Yep, that makes perfect sense.
The next part here. However, the words rendered man's apparel are literally baggage or equipment of a man, and this may support the view that it is female participation in warfare and male avoidance of warfare by disguise as a woman that is prohibited.
I like that. I think that's a pretty good assumption from a scholar of what this is saying, which, even though I hadn't thought about the religious context of pagan gender role reversal, all that stuff, and that would be all, I would say almost exclusively, I reckon that would be linked with warped sexual practices within pagan religions. That would come into it as well. However, what you just said there at the end is don't shirk your responsibility. You exist in that society. You bring your gifts, your talents, your current abilities for the common good. And to not go to war, to not be a provider, to not fight on behalf of your community would be irresponsible.
So God's heart is that we act responsibly to our neighbours and our
Jesus
nation.
said something like that, didn't he? Love your neighbour as yourself.
I don't know. He might
do
have.
unto others as you would have them do unto you. All the law
It's
and the
vaguely
prophets
familiar.
is summed up in these two things. So I think that's the principle, yeah.
All right, okay. So the next one here. Are you happy to move on?
Yep, go ahead.
Here we're talking about a bird's nest. Why are we talking about a bird's nest? Whether it's in a tree or on the ground and the mother sitting on the young on the eggs, don't take the mother with the young. Take the babies, but let the mother go. So you'll live a long life. What? Why are we talking about birds?
We're talking about eggs.
Eggs.
Birds,
And we're
eggs.
talking about birds.
We're talking about, we'll see it. Do we see it with trees in this?
No, you can eat the egg, but to maintain the life cycle, you have to leave the bird.
So I went and saw Kong, the new Kong movie before I went away, and set many years in the future. And the opening scene is them climbing up high to get to an eagle's nest. And they have an unwritten rule in their community based on this, that they are only allowed to take a certain number of eggs. They need to leave the eggs there.
Oh, I've seen that in other things
Have you?
too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Comes from here. So
What? Are you telling me that these Torah laws have played out in culture
Yes,
and
exactly.
understanding
Yep.
of the environment?
I would say they've played out in nearly every culture except modern Western culture where we abuse these laws. Because we don't think about this as practical, we just take with no margin. We just use everything to the maximum. These principles are saying if you want to be sustaining, if you want to think about the future, if you want to think about the common good of your children and your children's children, maybe you need to stop taking everything and leave some so that the mother can continue to have babies to perpetuate the species, which will give you eggs, which will give you food, all that kind of stuff. This is written into Torah. These
We do
practices.
abuse it, don't we?
We do.
I'm thinking about the chicken farms when we just hatch all the eggs.
Yep.
And then we just throw away the male chickens.
Yep.
I don't know what male chicken babies are called.
Don't know either.
Don't know.
But it's that same principle.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that our society is starting to wake up to some of these principles and going, this isn't sustainable and this is not even ethical. So we have ethical business practices now. And really, in many ways, I would say we're on the cusp. We're in the early days of a renaissance of ethical business practices. I don't think that was a thing 50 years ago.
Well, we could certainly think about this law in terms of fishing. No.
Yeah, exactly. You can fish out, and there's laws in place about not out.
Drag netting.
Exactly.
Whatever it's called.
Not completely fishing out a community. There's a law in the Old Testament. There's a law around leaving the land fallow for 1 year in 7. All these principles.
So are you saying that God's heart here is in the practical as well?
Yeah.
Because if we get rid of all of these food sources, it's not going to do us any good, but it's also not going to do the animals that he cares about any good. So God cares about those things? That's his heart?
Yes.
Who is this guy?
And let's add a little bit to that too. Christians' eschatology worldview has warped this. Many Christians think, well, what's the point? Because God's going to come back and wipe it all away anyway.
No, he's going to
Make it.
we're all going to
burn
be
up.
raptured,
We're all
and then
gonna
it's
be-
all going to be burnt.
Yeah, exactly. It's all going to be burned up anyway. So let's use up everything that God has given us. And I've heard Christian preachers say this, like God's given us these resources, so all this nonsense about caring for them, that's ridiculous. The God's given them, we should use them. So they might have theological reasons for that, but I think that counteracts the Torah instruction that God is saying here, which is care for the environment.
Weren't we supposed to care for the garden in Eden?
Yep.
Is this just another way of saying that?
Yep.
Care for his things.
Yes, steward what he has entrusted to us to make heaven come to earth, to make the world look like Eden. These are all principles, including caring for making sure you don't take the mum and leave all the eggs. And, you're going to if you start doing that, you're going to kill out a species in no time.
Yeah, because you just made me think then when we're talking about kingdom coming to earth, and we have to pray for God's kingdom to come to earth, but we also have to act in the sense that we have to be responsible with the life cycles of the creatures around us. We can't wipe them out and make them extinct.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, look at that.
So we're getting some Torah, some instruction
Yes.
out of ancient archaic laws that are
Look at that.
3,500 years old. They still are relevant today.
All right, now is the next one still relevant? When you build a new house, make a parapet, which is what?
My version says a railing.
A railing, yes, around your roof to make it safe so that someone doesn't fall off and
Oh,
die.
I think that's a good one.
And your family become responsible for the death.
I think you could argue that a law like that is the existence of why we have WHS
Oh my goodness, it
in
is
today's
too,
world.
isn't it?
Because I have personally witnessed in Bangkok, workers working 30 stories up in thongs with bamboo
Yeah.
scaffolding, working in thongs with no ropes. And they won't, if they fall, the owners of those properties, their employers won't get any retribution. They won't just be swept under the carpet because there isn't this principle at work, which we would have, gratefully so, rightfully so. So for all of you out there that hate doing risk assessments, it's in the law.
It is in the law, and it makes so much sense. But it's not just about being responsible for the death. It's taking steps to prevent because you care about the other person.
Yep.
Your life is as valuable as their life.
Correct. Yep.
Wow, look at that. Do you see those photos of New York, the New York skyline, when they were building all the big skyscrapers?
Oh, yeah.
And they're all sitting on
Sitting on those big
steel
rafters and
Yeah.
things. Yep. You've seen similar pictures of it when they were building Sydney Harbour Bridge as well. Yeah.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the famous one you're talking about is when they were building the Empire State Building.
Possibly.
That's what I've seen. Yeah.
They're
They're just
sitting there
out there
having lunch.
having their lunch, sitting out there unroped, having a smoko. Yep.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be heard of
Couldn't
today.
do it.
No.
No.
Because we were informed by these practices. But this is an area where that's less than 100 years ago where people weren't respected enough, valued enough to put laws in place. Praise God, we're now in a society where in the West these laws are becoming common practice.
Wow. Who would ever have thought, again, what you said thousands of years ago is still relevant and important today?
Amen.
There's this heart.
Yep.
Still cares.
For sure.
Okay, next one. Don't plant two kinds of seed in your vineyard. Why? If you will, you forfeit what you've sown. What is that? Why not plant two seeds in the vineyard?
I'm going to have a stab at this. I don't know if this is agricultural. It might be. It could be saying, if you put too many plants together, your grapes are going to be swallowed by something else. It could be just a simple practical agricultural thing. But I wonder if it's linked in some way back to that whole principle around women wearing men's clothing and men wearing women's clothing. It's that principle of make sure everything's in its place within a society for it to function. Everything has to be in its place. But that's just off the top of my head.
I wouldn't have done that, but
yeah, I'm
I
just
can see how you
spitballing
get
there. I'm thinking, have order in your society. But anyway, what do you have? Did you look it up?
No, I have
Yeah.
nothing. I actually said leave this one for Rohan.
Well, I would have to stop and study it. We won't do that. We'll leave that one for our hearers. But I'm just thinking you will find some ideas. But if you study a few commentaries, you go, and something will click and make some sense.
Because one hinders the growth of the other. And sometimes you can have some don't fertilize or do fertilize, depending on whether you have one or the other, I think.
Yep, so there's a good agricultural practice that's being applied here.
It seems to be a very sensical. Is that a word? Yes. Sensical law?
Sensible? Sensical? What do you mean?
I think I blended two words here. you can make sense of the law.
Yeah, I wonder if it's just as simple as a common sense, good agricultural practice.
Is sensical a word or not? I don't think it is.
Not the word that I'm aware of.
It wouldn't be the first time I've made up a word. It won't be the last.
Common sense, sensible. I don't know, but it would make sense to me if it's just a practical application of how to do agricultural work.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that could be that.
So
Wouldn't be surprised if there's an underlying principle that's deeper than just make sure you plant your crops wisely.
But ultimately, it's about being fertile, fruitful, creating a crop. And so God is caring about what we have.
Yes. Here we go. This is why my implication's coming out, because the next verses are going to talk about unequal yoking and things like that.
Okay.
So if you put them in order, we've just read about not planting crops together.
You can keep going. Yep.
Don't unequally yoke. Then verse 10 says you must not plough with an ox and a donkey harnessed together. You must not wear clothing made of wool and linen woven together.
That's a weird one.
So there's something going on here about different things fitting together in an unhealthy way. I wonder if there's a Torah under that we can apply. And I would almost be sure there would be. It's something about not making sure everything has its place in society, and that's where I was getting at.
Okay.
That's just my best guess.
All right.
Did you have any thoughts on that?
No, I was looking up if sensical was a word.
We're still going on sensical, are we?
Nonsensical sentence.
Oh, nonsensical. Yes, of course.
While a sensical sentence.
I've never used the word.
A sensical sentence is one which is consistent.
Yes. Okay. It makes sense.
Oh, thank goodness.
There you go. I've never used that word, but nonsensical. Yes, I've seen that used in that context.
Yeah. All right. Hang on. But sensical is not a word. Why is nonsensical a word, but sensical is not? So there. You can't blame me for thinking
that's completely
it was
nonsensical. That nonsensical is a word and sensical isn't.
Okay. So here, these next verses, they're talking about the safety, right, of others.
Yes.
Don't mix the ox with the donkey.
Yes.
Because one, they'll be unevenly yoked.
Yep.
One will take all of the burden and the other won't.
Yep.
So you could cripple one and...
You could harm one at the expense of the other. Yep, that's right.
Yep. So one gets the raw deal, which is probably the ass.
Yes. Did you write that in your notes?
Yes, I did. I didn't. Well, yes, but no. Okay. So here again, God cares for the animals. So how much more would he care for you if he's writing this in law? How much more would he care for you?
Well, the Apostle Paul will pick up on this scripture and he'll talk about that. Do not this particular one, but don't tread out an ox while it's muzzling the grain. And the Apostle Paul will say in 2 Corinthians, do you think he's just talking about oxen or do you think he's talking about a deeper principle?
We'll get to that.
We're getting
that happens
there. Okay.
In the next one.
All right. So here's what I just found. You go ahead. I'll come.
No, you go.
I was just going to say this once again. This was a quick little search. This is why I like ChatGPT, because then it gives me a prompt and then I can go and think about it. It says, the modern insight of these laws we've just read, this string of laws here in 9 to 12, is the emphasised purity and distinctiveness. The principle is maintaining ethical and boundaries that avoid harmful mixtures in various aspects of life. Like you said, harming one animal at the expense of another. There are similar laws that existed though often with practical rather than moral emphasis in other cultures. So the whole thing is purely a practical, don't put the ox and the donkey together because it's not going to work for you. But it seems that Deuteronomy is digging deeper than just the practical. It is that, and there's a moral emphasis to it as well. Deuteronomy's focus on purity has a strong moral and religious underpinning. So I think if you drill down into it, there'll be moral implications as well as practical implications for why these laws exist.
Yes, I agree with that. Was that ChatGPT?
That was ChatGPT, yeah.
I'm learning to love AI.
Yep. Yeah. But once again, you take that and you go, okay, I'd have to compare that. But what ChatGPT does in these sorts of things is you can ask it to give you a few different ideas. If I get stuck on a scripture, I go, give me 4 different perspectives on how to interpret this. And suddenly it just illuminates something. And then I've got a bit of an idea to run with and study. That's how I use it, rather than just say, hey, this is absolute truth. But it just triggers when I get stuck.
You know what I do?
What do you do?
I get 4 different books.
You do, and I don't have the time to do that.
No,
so that's why I start this way. Yeah. I mean, you're better than what I'm doing. If you've got time to go and study 4 different books, do it. I used to just go straight to commentaries, but now I find this is like just a quick pin that will then help me to go to commentaries. Okay.
What I noticed in verse 11 here, wool and linen. One's summer, one's winter.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my first note.
Seasonal. Yep.
Seasonal.
Wool and linen when they're washed, they're different. So one will stretch, one won't.
Yeah.
So the fabric will break. All
If,
these sorts of things
if
will
you
come
go
into it.
through YouTube videos of this verse here, you will find.
Do you go down the rabbit hole in a hurry?
No, it doesn't go in a hurry. You can go down and down and down on this. There's so many theories about it, so
Right.
I'm not going to get into
Yeah.
it. But it must have made more sense to them
Yes,
than us.
I think
But
that's fair.
I also wonder if it hints at religious context, particularly the make tassels on the four corners of the cloak, because didn't they have specific clothes that the priests had to wear, and some of them had tassels?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yes,
makes
they
sense?
did. Yeah, and the time of Jesus, the Pharisees had, and even modern Jews, the modern Orthodox Jews have tassels that remind them of certain prayers and things.
So could this be pointing at, hey, the Levites are set apart to wear those religious clothes with the tassels, but you guys don't, you know?
Yes, yeah,
Like
it could be a
that.
separation of roles.
And
the
linen
greater
was
good.
the priestly clothes, right?
Yep.
They didn't wear wool.
They didn't wear wool,
Right.
not when they were doing their priestly duties.
Okay, so linen was separated,
So are you saying that there's religious,
set apart.
religious and moral implications
Yeah.
for this? Yes, I think that's right. So don't. Well, let's go back to what we just said. Make sure you feel your responsibility. Don't try and be the priest. You're not called to be the priest. Priest is
Yeah.
there. You serve them. They serve you for the good of the total community. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think you need to know more about what's going on
Yeah.
to understand that little verse there.
Definitely.
So should we go on?
Chapter
Move on?
23?
No, we've
Still got more to go.
We're not even halfway.
Oh, right.
But no, we've got this whole chunk here about a man
Oh, yes, we are
marrying
too.
a woman who
That's right.
sleeps with her and then turns on her, calling her. I'm not going to read the word that Eugene Peterson uses.
Yeah.
But
It says here, I discovered she was not a virgin. Let's go with that.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Then the father or the mother of a girl, they take over the proof of her virginity. This is so outdated to the town leaders of the gate. Why are we reading this in the Bible? Why is it getting so graphic here?
I would think that part of it is because, once again, for the good of an entire community, there were appropriate sexual practices. There was an expectation that men and women would exist within a family unit for the good of the society. They would have children within a family unit. They would experience sexual conduct within the family unit, and to take it outside of that is not just shameful for the person or people involved, it's also detrimental to the wider community because for all the reasons we just said about multiple wives, you end up with a dysfunctional community where people have children out of wedlock, and it causes all these social dysfunctions we were just talking about that we even have today. We've done a lot to try to prevent that happening, but it's still there. So I wonder if that's just why it was shameful to find out that a woman wasn't a virgin.
Okay.
And that's not an uncommon. Look, I've talked a lot about medieval Europe. This was actually a common practice in medieval Europe, especially for a king.
I think it was even into. I remember seeing an Italian movie where they did something, and it wasn't even that long. It was probably around World War I, where they had to go and prove her virginity, and they got some blood from an animal or something and pinned it up on the sheet
to make it look like it was.
So it was still common. It was still happening.
It was still happening, and so then that's directly from this law. Now, I don't know about the context of that, but if you put it in the context of, maybe it's just coming to me here. For the same reason that the first-born son needed to be given that family respect, can you imagine if there is this uncertainty about the virginity of a woman and the woman falls pregnant? How do we know that child is actually the heir of the estate? Because that child will be the one who will inherit the family name and inherit the estate. If this woman has not...
I get it.
You know where I'm going? Is the reason I'm saying that is because that's how it was with the kings of England, the kings of Europe. They were expecting, their wedding night, everyone stood around, they closed the curtains, and they had to produce evidence of the virginity of the woman, because what was at stake was the kingdom, was the heir to the kingdom. They needed to know that the baby that was going to be born was legitimate.
Yes, I see what you're saying.
I think that might be part of what's going on here. It's this sense of legitimacy, so that we respect our family name, our unit enough to ensure that the children that are born to us are genuinely our heirs and not from another family member.
I get that, yeah. What's interesting in here is it's the fact that the father takes the initiative in his daughter's defence here
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, he's protecting.
There's that community aspect to
Yeah.
go protect his child, yeah.
Yep. Because
And
up until that point, the father is the carer of that young lady until he gets to that point where he has supposedly handed over that economic responsibility to the husband. There's been a bride price paid so that if he decides he ever wants to divorce her, dad should have some money that he can provide for that divorcee. But at this point, he's now standing up for her and protecting her.
And here the husband gets whipped if he's found to
If he's
be
been found
incorrect.
to be
He's
incorrect.
whipped, required to pay a fine to the girl's father. This makes me think of Joseph and Mary. Does it make you think of Joseph and Mary? Because even though she was pregnant, he still married her.
Yeah.
And how culturally, because this would have still been in play.
In practice, yep.
Yeah. How culturally different that was.
Well, that's why it actually says of Joseph he had in mind to divorce her quietly. He wasn't going to do this. He wasn't going to disrespect Mary by making a big public spectacle of her and shaming her in front of the community, even though at that point he would have been hurt until he knew otherwise. Rightfully so, he would have been hurt to find out that Mary was pregnant. But he had such an integrity about him that he was prepared not to do this. He was living by, you could argue he was living by a higher law, even though he was breaking this law by not going to shame her.
There's a lot more in this.
There is.
There is. And here there was a fine. The husband had to pay a fine if she was found not guilty.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And the fine would have been big enough to deter husbands from making frivolous
False
charges.
claims. Yep.
All right. Okay. But then if there's no evidence, the poor girl gets to be stoned.
Oh, if there's no evidence. This is pretty screwed up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless you can see it within the constraints of society that did allow for the evidence of virginity. If you put it in 21st century mindset, we don't have a society that's set up in such a way that there is any significant evidence of virginity. But in that context, they did have it. The way the bridal chamber was set up and all that sort of stuff, it would have been possible to get evidence of virginity because of the blood. We just don't have that today. So it seems like, this seems like it's hard for the woman. But I would think that in this culture, it would have been relatively easy for the woman to prove her virginity.
And it continues on here because later on, if a man is found sleeping with another man's wife, they both must die.
Mm-hmm.
Purge that evil from Israel. It's about purging the evil, this whole little chunk.
Mm-hmm.
And if a man comes upon a virgin in town, a girl who is engaged to another man and sleeps with her, take both of them to the town gate and stone them. The girl because she didn't yell out for help in the town, and the man because he raped her, violating the fiancé of his neighbour. But if it was out in the country, then the man, it was in the country that the man found the engaged girl and grabbed and raped her. Only the man is to die. So if he gets a chick. It was terrible. I forgot. I thought I was just talking to you.
Not talking to the entire podcast world.
Okay.
Pick up a chick.
Excuse me there.
I'm glad it's you that said it, not me.
Okay. He goes in to a town and abuses a girl, a woman, and both of them are killed, presumably because if she'd have screamed, people would have heard her. Yep. But if she screams in the country, no one can hear her. Yep. Where is God in this?
I think God, I reckon it shows God's protectiveness of women. Because it could have been that the two of them just decided not to sleep with each other in town but ran out into the bush.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. But it's that there's, in the absence of doubt, innocent until proven guilty. And I think the absence of doubt in this situation out in the bush is that it has to be assumed that the physically stronger man would have, forced himself on the woman, and the woman is being protected by that. So I think that's what it's saying. And we need to recognise it. We need to come down a level with the whole thing of, fornication and sex outside of marriage and all that sort of stuff. We can deal with it at that level, and we should imply that, but we need to come down a level and go, why is this such a big deal to God? And you touched on it. It's because God's initial intention was the family unit, the value of a family unit, having children, filling the earth, and so on. So that's the underlying principle that is being disrespected when people are just sleeping around or there's sexual assault. It's that underlying devaluing of God's intention for the perpetuation of the human race and his kingdom values on the earth.
And the threat of death here, I see less as judgment, but rather as revealing how valued they all are. Because don't do this because you will die is actually, these people are so valued that I want everybody to live.
I think
You
it's
see,
a great way
it's
to see.
the opposite way around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So rather than, let me see if I can rephrase what you're saying, rather than just focusing on the punishment of death, focus on how this shows the value of life.
Yes, death is the deterrent because people are valued.
Yeah.
Did I say that right? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good.
Yep. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that's probably how we are to see a lot of these laws, is that the consequences should point us to God's best, to wanting to live by God's best values.
Yes, because God doesn't want them to die.
No, he
No.
wants them to live. And all the while explaining and helping them to see, as Paul will say in Romans, you need to understand that the law was given to prove that you can't live by it. The idea is you look at this and go, wow, our society, our life, and my own heart is not at that standard yet. I need someone to help me externally to come, Christ, to come and kill sin in me so that I can live by this standard. And that's what Jesus did.
Yeah. And if you take a girl out and you rape her, that's your life. Her life is as valuable as your life. And you should know that.
Yes. Yeah. Now, there are other interesting, I don't know if we'll come to it in these passages or not, but there are other interesting laws where it says that if a man sleeps with a woman, and this one specifically talking about someone who's engaged to be married to someone else. Maybe this is the difference. This is a situation where the woman was engaged to someone else.
This is the next verse.
Is it?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Oh, no,
Oh,
sorry.
yes, it is. Yes, you're right.
No, she's...
Yes.
No.
It's the same woman. Then he must marry the young woman because he has violated her and he must never divorce her as long as he lives. There it is right there. Is that what you're talking about? Verse?
Yes.
Yes. So
Okay.
it's in the same context. So what he's saying is you made your bed, you got to lie in it. So you have to mix the metaphor here. Why would that? Because we would say, well, that's a horrible thing to do. If a man has raped a woman, why on earth would there be a law that says now you got to marry her? Because that seems like the ultimate torture for that woman, and it would not be good. But the torture of not marrying her, because with marriage comes societal, it comes economic security and provision, the ability to bear children, all of those things. The opposite of that in that society was none of that, dying on the streets, poor, impoverished, with no provision. So it's progressive, not regressive in its context.
That's the redemption of that woman.
Yes,
because
it's the redemption
she
of that
would have been treated so poorly. She would have been an outcast because of what this man did to her.
There's a story about when Amnon rapes his sister Tamar.
Oh, yeah.
And Absalom takes her in, and she remains Amnon is Tamar's full brother. Absalom is his full brother. He's her full brother. Amnon is her half brother, and he raped her, which is horrible in itself. This is David. We'll do this when we do David's story. But Absalom takes her in and basically fulfills that role of the father and protects her. And it says she lives as a desolate woman in Absalom's house, which is horrible. But it's good that Absalom provided for her, and then Absalom presumes to kill his brother in retribution for that.
It's a terrible story.
This story of David's family is messed up. But you can see this at work here, this sense of a woman, to show that what would have happened to Tamar had Absalom not taken her in, as she would have been.
All because David took a woman.
All because David took a woman that he shouldn't have taken, right back at the start, And we'll definitely deal with that in a couple of months' time when we talk about this. But you can see how even in many of these situations in David's life, we see these laws aren't applied. The whole David and Bathsheba thing, David gets his sin. What he committed was a capital offense according to Mosaic law, and yet it wasn't applied that way. Nathan says the Lord has forgiven you. David should have been killed according to Mosaic law for murdering Uriah, and he didn't. So you can see how they're trying to work these laws out. And we should do the same. We should try to dig down below the face value and look at the underlying principle of wisdom that's there for how we conduct
Because if
ourselves.
these laws weren't there, a man could have done anything he wanted to do with any female he came across.
Yep. And the Pharisees asked Jesus that very question. In the law, Moses commanded that we could give a certificate of divorce to our wife and send her away. Is that in
next chapter?
Okay, let's do it in
I
next
think.
chapter then.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. We'll save it till then. Anything else in that chapter?
No, it's 2 chapters away. But
It's
anyway,
2 chapters. We'll get there. We'll save it till then. Stay tuned, folks. All right, next chapter.
Deuteronomy 23, we're going to be talking about such fabulous things as eunuchs.
I just looked at this, my opening line. If a man's testicles are crushed and his penis is cut off.
What? Oh, yours is more graphic than
Mine's
mine,
more
I
graphic
think.
than...
Yes.
Is this more graphic than Eugene Peterson's?
Yeah,
What's
he
it?
just calls them eunuchs.
Let's go with that then.
Okay. No eunuch is to enter the congregation of God. What? No bastard. I can't believe I just said bastard in a church context. No bastard is to enter the... I said it 3 times.
Three
my
times.
mum will come and wash my mouth
Yeah.
out. To enter the...
How about the NLT on that one? It says if a person is illegitimate by birth. Let's go with
That's
that.
better. Okay. They can't enter the congregation of God, even to the 10th generation. What? No Ammonite or Moabite is to enter the congregation of God. What is the congregation of God?
God's people, the nation of Israel.
Oh, so they can't...
Can't be
So these are
accepted into
foreigners.
society. That one is. Ammonite and Moabites are.
No eunuch, though,
That's not necessarily foreigner.
who in Israel is making people eunuchs.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, probably there's no law that allows for people to be made eunuchs. I think it would have been a common practice in the ancient... It was a common practice in other ancient societies.
It was very common.
Very common,
It had
especially
a
in the
lot
King's
to do,
Court.
yeah, in the King's Court, and
Mhm.
sometimes religious practices,
Yep.
weren't they?
Yep.
And they were often slaves.
Yep.
As well, or they could be advisors, servants of
You've been
women.
watching Game of Thrones? It's pretty common.
Yeah.
Yes.
I stopped watching that a long time ago.
Yes, but that was a common practice and was in medieval Europe, which is what Game of Thrones is built on, the 1400s Europe, I think.
Oh,
So-
yes, I remember the eunuch in it now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a pretty common practice in that culture.
But they were considered to have low social status, right? About the level of a woman.
Generally speaking, yes.
So why then were they allowed to be advisors, and they were often in the King's Court?
I don't know. I think my understanding, my best guess was that eunuchs could be advisors because the king didn't see them as a threat, because they couldn't have their own children. Therefore, they could sidle up to the king, but they wouldn't be at risk of subversing the king by raising their own family and taking the throne. That would be my best guess.
Yeah, that's an obvious one, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yes.
Yeah. And yet they had wisdom, and they weren't affected to the same degree by sexual desire that would cause them to, they were probably very loyal. Testosterone wasn't causing them the problems that other men have, all those kind of things. So I wonder if that's why they were able to often sidle themselves up into positions of power within the court.
They were trusted, I suppose,
Trusted,
as well.
yeah. Yeah.
By the way, I thought of so many jokes then that I just
I
did
bet
not
you did.
say. I don't know if you saw the look on my
I
face.
did see you smirk.
I smirked. I'm not going to say it. But my question here is, does this have anything to do with children being offered to gods? My note being that parents would often, or not often, but parents did mutilate their children either in honor of the gods or to get higher wages for them as slaves. So this
Ooh.
law is a deterrent for parents to do
I
that,
like
to
it.
mutilate their children.
I like that. I reckon that I've never thought of that, Jeanie. That makes a lot of sense, because that would have been a common practice once again in the neighbouring people around about them. And time and again, God will say, don't be like the nations around you, especially in these areas of sexual practices and sacrificing of children and all that sort of stuff. The other nations do that. Don't be like them. So, yeah, that would make sense. Not to use the children for their own benefit. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is what I mean. And so here it's eunuch is to enter the congregation. It's like you can't do that to your children.
Wow, I like that.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. rather than presuming that it's okay.
Yeah.
Because it says
not okay to
it's not
mutilate.
okay to make a eunuch,
Yeah. It's
make
not
your
okay
child into a eunuch.
to sell your child as a eunuch slave or as a slave.
Right. So that does not mean that the opposite, which we assume that is, let's say, a eunuch runs away from a foreign power and comes into Israel and says, well, I want to be accepted. What's the word when you want asylum?
Yep.
Maybe it runs away from a foreign court and it says, I want asylum. It's not saying don't let them in. It's more about saying don't create eunuchs rather than don't accept eunuchs that are vulnerable. Wow, I like that.
Yeah.
That sits really well.
Because here, like, really, how would somebody know if somebody was a eunuch or not without them being told or exposed? So a foreigner could come and be a eunuch and have nobody ever know.
No one would know.
Yeah.
Correct.
But
wow, that's
parents created eunuchs.
Don't
Eunuchs
create
were created.
Eunuchs. Yes. Yeah, don't create eunuchs.
Somebody did a horrible thing for their own
benefit.
Yeah.
And even in the case of a parent creating a eunuch in another culture, taking their son and turning them into a eunuch so they could be accepted into the court, wouldn't often even be for the child's benefit. It might actually be so that they get higher social standing within
all of
the
those
court.
things. Yeah.
Ah, yeah, that's good. Similar to what I see in Bridgerton, where they're always pushing forward their
You watch
children.
Bridgerton?
Oh, Bridgerton! I'm a big we're Bridgerton fans, Jill and I.
Wow.
Yeah.
Things you learn about your pastor.
Pastor Jeff likes Bridgerton. I said to Jeff, how's it going? What have you been doing? He goes, I've been watching Bridgerton.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But it's that same thing of you're always pushing your children forward into the eyes of the royalty, but it's really not about the child. It's about our social status.
Yeah.
And that's what this is telling us not to do. Don't use and abuse others, even your own children, for your own social status.
Yeah, because a eunuch is a victim. So
Correct.
is a bastard or
Yes.
an illegitimate child.
Yep.
They're victims.
Yep.
And so the heart of the law, the Lord here, not the law, heart of God here is don't abuse your children.
I like that. Yep. Don't use them for your own purposes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But the Ammonites, on the other hand,
Different
that's a different
situation.
situation. That goes back to what event? Can you fill that in?
I'm going to guess Book of Numbers. That's my best guess. When they went through these lands and they said, could we go through and use water and get paid and then we're not going to touch your land. We'll go through and we'll take our promised land. And the Ammonites, the Moabites came out and fought against them. Is that what it is?
And treated them really
treated
badly.
them badly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
treated
what it was.
the weak and the vulnerable very
They
badly.
pinched them off the stragglers and took them. And yes, I think
Yes,
that's
they showed no hospitality, which we've learned.
Is
we
important
talked
in
about,
that culture.
we talked about previously on the Sodom and Gomorrah thing.
Yep.
Hospitality was considered a very important thing to God, and Sodom and Gomorrah lacked hospitality, and the Ammonites here lacked hospitality.
And that was a very serious offence in that culture.
Yes.
Yes, especially in the desert culture.
Yes, so much so God wants to wipe them out. Like he wiped out Sodom and Gomorrah, he wants to wipe out the Ammonites.
Well, he wants to wipe them out, or that's the understanding. We're going down the Bible violence of the Book of Judges, a whole different argument.
It is, yeah.
Let's not go down that one. So
all right, okay.
we have dealt with that,
up.
and we'll deal with that in more context as time goes on. But that's not the context here today.
And
Sorry about that. Otherwise, we'll be here all day.
And the eunuch thing, just going back to that, because this is quite important. What was the command in the garden when Adam and Eve were? What were they told to do?
Lots of things. Go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. That what you're after?
Yes. And so if you are creating eunuchs within your community, you're actually in direct violation of what God has planned and purposed for that person.
Yep. That's right. Now, I've seen that weaponized in the Christian church where, if you can have children and you choose not to have children, you're wrong. I think that's not the right way to approach this. I think there is scope within all communities for people to not have children for various reasons. That's different to forcing.
Yes, they've taken
violating a choice.
Taken away the choice.
I think that's a different issue. I just want to clarify that. But I think in this case, they've ruined that child's chance of ever choosing for themselves.
Yes, they have.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, where are we up to?
We're talking about the Moabite and the Ammonite.
And I went back, didn't I?
You did go back. That's all right. Well, there is a significant Moabite.
Yes,
that is entered into welcomed into the assembly of the Lord.
What was her name?
I think her name might be Ruth.
And who was she, the great-grandmother of? Or?
King David.
Yeah.
And she's in the line of Jesus.
Yeah.
So isn't that interesting?
And there was another one too, wasn't there? Who starts with T, her name?
Well, she's not she was from, you talking about Tamar from...
Oh, was she not a Moabite?
No, she was from Jericho. She was in one of the... You're talking about the spy.
Oh, that's Rahab.
Rahab.
There's another one. I'm sure of it.
Rahab. Well, the women in the genealogy are Rahab, Ruth, Tamar, Mary.
Who was Tamar?
Tamar was Judah's wife, who Judah. He became Judah. She became Judah's wife. She was the wife of two of Judah's sons. But she basically pretended to be a prostitute, but she was accepted into. But she was a Jew, I think, or maybe not. Maybe, but she was certainly married. She married Judah. But she may not have been her Jew herself. I'm not sure. Can't remember. But there were foreign women in the line of Jesus, which seems to violate these laws. So what are these laws telling us? They're not telling us under no circumstances there's a deeper Torah, deeper principle at work. And like you said, maybe in this case it's about hospitality.
Why would God, your God, refuse to listen to Balaam but turned the curse into a blessing? Balaam was the donkey?
Balaam was the prophet who had the donkey.
Oh, of course, the donkey doesn't have a name.
Donkey,
right.
pick me, pick
Okay,
me.
So God turned a curse into a blessing.
Or maybe there's a hint in the text then.
What?
Well, Balaam was hired by Balak to curse
Israel,
right? Balaam could not curse Israel because he couldn't go against what he believed the Lord was telling him to do. So Balaam found another way to destroy Israel. And he enticed a bunch of Jewish men to sleep with Moabite women. And in doing so, he enticed those men towards Moabite worship practices. And the Moabites were among the most, there was a lot of child sacrifice in Moabite practice, which was detestable to God. So Balaam used Moabite women to steal the hearts and basically corrupt God's people. Maybe that's what God's coming strong at and saying, in this situation, the reason that no Ammonite and Moabite woman can enter or descendant woman could come into the house, it doesn't even say women, but it's implied women. The reason they can't come in is because I can't trust you not to be corrupted by them.
Right, they were seduced into idolatry and seduced into practices such as creating eunuchs.
Yes. So I'm going to put a boundary in place that says it can't happen, but it's not because they're bad, it's because you're bad.
I get it,
It's because you don't have the self-respect. You don't have the ability to love them and make them like you. You're going to be corrupted by their practices. And we can't, for the purpose of my plan of creating a nation that lives by a different standard, you're not ready to receive them yet.
So this is a law of like, remember who I am, God, and remember who you are in me.
Yep.
And how easy it is for you to be taken away, to be seduced.
To be seduced away. But you can see how this could become very elitist very quickly. And we start blaming the Moabites and the Ammonites for being wicked, all the while failing to realise that God's put this law in place because we, the Jews, aren't who we should be.
Yep. I get that. Now here, verse 7 continues. Don't spurn an Edomite. He's your king.
Mm-hmm.
Kin. Don't spurn an Egyptian. You were a foreigner once. And children born to Edomites and Egyptians may enter the congregation of God.
In the third generation.
generation.
There'll be significance in the 10 generations and the 3 generations, I think. But the principle I think it's saying is that, well, the Edomites are there. Edomites are Esau.
Yes.
So they are the closest, basically Israel's brother, you could argue in this sense. The Egyptians, they were slaves. So it's maybe trying to show them compassion. It's trying to remind them they're not, maybe the risk is they're not likely to be corrupted in the same way by the Edomites and the Egyptians as they were with the Moabites and the Ammonites, religiously and sexually corrupted and so on. So therefore, there's less of a risk, so you can let them in. Maybe that's just my best guess.
I think it's a pretty good guess. I didn't really have many notes on this because I just found it so strange. There's a lot of things that we have to know, I think, about
the
these passages.
context.
Context.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
which we are trying to figure out, which is just common practice to them. There would be things that make sense to them that don't make sense to us because they were living it. And we need to honour the ancient culture enough to respect the ancient culture enough to do the work to make it say what it was saying to them rather than what we think it's saying to us. And then we imply what it's saying to us from what it was saying to them.
Yep. Okay. I can continue on here. Or do you have anything else to say about that? All right. So when you're camped out at war, we're back at war with your enemies, be careful to keep yourself from anything ritually defiling. This is the chunk about the latrines.
Yep.
I love that word, latrines.
Latrines.
Yeah. It's so World War II.
It is a World War II thing, isn't it? Yes, very much so.
Yeah. If one of your men has become ritually unclean, you can read this part.
Any man who becomes ceremonially defiled because of a nocturnal emission must leave the camp and stay away all day.
I couldn't read that without laughing. So you had to do that. What are your thoughts on this? Why is God getting why is he so interested in this kind of stuff?
Yeah, okay. So I'm just thinking what Tim Mackey says about these principles around, there's a lot of strange laws around bodily fluids.
From Leviticus.
Right. And here again in Deuteronomy. And what Tim Mackey says is what these bodily fluids, the menstrual fluids and the semen and all that, what they represent. And when you think about it, they represent life. They are the source of life. And if God is trying to teach these people, we've seen it time and again with these laws today, he is trying to teach them the value of life. These, although they seem quite confronting to us, they are there to show that your sexual practices, the reproductive organs, all of this stuff is highly esteemed and valued. Don't treat it disrespectfully. Recognize that this is part of what you just said, the Genesis mandate to be fruitful and multiply. So treat the reproductive systems, reproductive practices, sexual practice with a high level of moral integrity. It's not saying nocturnal emissions are bad. It's not saying a woman having a period is evil. It's not saying any of that. It's just saying treat it with a high level of respect.
Are God God want us to treat our bodies with a high level of respect?
Because we are the image of God, and we are being charged with procreation, with co-creation with God to create children. So treat that with respect. That is the ability to create or procreate, partner with God in the creation of little images of God is a huge and massive responsibility that we should take seriously.
So why was this guy considered unclean? He had to go and wash himself, returning to the camp at sunset. So
once again, Tim Mackey says that unclean does not mean evil. This is, I haven't remembered exactly what he said about it, but I remember him quoting a scholar about this. I wish I could find the exact quote, but it'll take too long to try and find it. It was in one of his podcasts where he was just saying it's not evil, but it's this recognition that the bodily fluid, the semen in this case, is in a sense holy, and it should be treated as holy because it's creative. A woman's reproductive system is holy, and it should be treated as holy. So it's not, unfortunately, it's been weaponized that women are unclean when they have their period, or they're impure, or they're evil when they have their period. That's not what it was. That's not how God was trying to say. He was trying to say, treat it with respect, be clean, recognize to some degree that you're for both a man and a woman, both those things represent life. So don't be flippant about it. Clean yourself, treat yourself well, recognize that that is an entrusted, a greatly entrusted responsibility that you've been given.
Although in this particular passage, there are no women around. It's just speaking.
In this case, speaking to the man.
Men in an army camp.
Yep. Well, man's away from home. He's not having relationships with his wife.
Can he go to war when he's ritually unclean?
I don't know. I can't think. I mean, the very fact that they go to war makes them ritually unclean.
I have so many jokes I could make, but I'm not going to.
It's complex passages.
I was just going to say, because if then there would be a reason to not go to war. You would do some things to not go to war.
Yeah, exactly. You'd use that as an example of not going to war. No, I don't think so. God is appearing in the camp. So when they're in camp at war.
God is with them
God
at
is
war.
with them in war.
Usually.
So
Yeah.
if they're just treating their reproduction flippantly, they are disrespecting God's presence, his life force within them. And to not treat it respectfully is to disrespect God. And therefore, how can they expect that God would remain in the camp?
Okay. Are they respecting the men who are camping next to them?
I think not.
Right.
I think it's that same thing. So it's respecting the man camping next to them. It's which is an extension of God among them. God is in that person next to them. I think there's definitely depth there. It's
Okay. Does this have anything to do with Uriah? You know how when Uriah goes back to David calls him back, but he doesn't actually go and see.
Go and sleep with Bathsheba.
Because he's honouring this thing that when you're camped out, you've got to keep yourself from anything ritually defiling. I don't know.
Well, it wouldn't have been ritually defiling for him to sleep with his wife.
But perhaps they took that.
Perhaps this is what he's took it as going, going.
While
you
you're
answer
at
it.
war,
While
nobody
you're at
can
war.
engage in any sexual activity.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. There's this sense of what, because Uriah says, why would I do such a thing and dishonor the Lord and dishonor you by having the pleasure of sleeping with my wife while the king and the ark and all the lords, well, the king, but you king, you're at home, but all your men and the ark are all out on the battlefield. Why would I disrespect the Lord and his people so much as to have this pleasure while they're all out there? So yeah, I think there's a sense of honoring of others in this, that maybe that's part of what's going on.
I can see that. Honour the people you're around.
Honour the people you're around.
Stay focused as well.
Stay focused, yeah. Yeah, and
you are at war.
You are at war, and you will, if you go out to battle, you're going to be ritually unclean by the end of the day because you've touched dead bodies and so on, so just to put it in perspective. So there is the moment you touch a dead body, you're ritually unclean according to Mosaic law. So anytime they went to war, they were ritually unclean.
Okay. Which basically just meant they couldn't go to
the tabernacle.
temple.
Yes, they couldn't go to the temple for that period of time that they were ritually unclean. Because basically, it was a way of saying they couldn't approach God's presence. Not that it was evil, just that cleanliness symbolizes a ritual thing rather than a moral thing. I think that's how it sort of scholars look at it. When we think unclean, we automatically think immoral. It's not immoral. It's different. It's a ritual cleanliness.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm happy with that conversation.
I'm happy to pass right on beyond that conversation.
Let's move on to the latrines.
Okay. Let's just continue on.
Okay. This is basically saying mark an area outside of the camp where you can go and relieve yourself.
Dig a hole.
Dig a hole.
Use a spade.
And cover. Yes.
Yeah.
Because God scrolls through your camp.
Here it is.
Before.
Yeah, this
God
is the point of what I'm saying.
Camp.
Yeah.
He's present to deliver you. We should have read this whole thing.
We should have read it all. Yeah, because
to deliver you and give you victory. So keep your camp holy. Don't permit anything indecent. All right. So that makes more sense about what we were just discussing.
Yep.
And holy.
Yes.
But I love how it's going beyond, beyond the holiness, but it's also speaking about things that they had no concept of bacteria and all sorts of stuff, which we know well now.
Yeah. We would understand the practical implications of this.
Yeah. But God knew the practical implications.
Yeah. And I think some people will say it only exists at that practical level. This is just God putting practical things in place so that disease doesn't spread. I would think it's that and more. I would think there are implications for respecting. It seems to be saying here it's respecting the fact that God is among you enough to honor him by allowing your bodily functions to happen outside the camp.
Yeah.
I think there's a principle there, as well as the practical health.
There was no condemnation for any of that.
No,
though.
That's right.
Be holy when God is walking amongst you.
Totally. It's not that these things are bad. It's just that I recognise that these bodily functions are part of and are given before God, so I'll treat them with respect.
Yeah.
I think that's all it's saying.
All right. I'll give you that.
Maybe there's more to it, but let's go with that for today.
Verse 15, don't return a runaway slave to his master. He comes for you for refuge. Don't let him live wherever he wishes within the protective gates. Do let him live and don't take advantage of him. I can't imagine many other cultures having that one.
No way. Not at all.
A runaway slave.
Yep. You'd make them a slave.
Yes.
At the very least, you go, oh, great, another slave, more property for me. Saying, no.
He's granted freedom.
It's granted freedom when he runs away. He's granted
and protection.
I wonder if that has implications for our policies around immigration.
Yeah.
Just the thought to throw out there.
It's a good thought to
Especially
throw out
for
there.
some Christians who might have a different perspective. I'm not saying immigration is an easy subject. It's a complex economic subject, but there is implications there.
I will say, though, often when, certainly in the United States, when refugees do cross the border, they are very readily taken advantage of.
Yes.
Unless they are legal, to
Unless
use that
they're
term.
legal to- yes.
They now say documented.
Documented.
Yep.
Yep, that's right. So they get abused, which is basically not abiding by this principle, which is saying elevate the slave,
Yeah.
the vulnerable person.
It's more than elevate. He's almost given citizenship
Yes. Yeah.
straight away.
So there's a famous runaway slave in the New Testament. Do you know who I'm talking about?
No, not at the moment.
His name is Onesimus, and he runs
Ooh.
away from his
One Nesimus.
one Simus. He runs away from his master, the Christian Philemon,
Yes, I remember now.
and runs to
Yep.
Paul. Paul takes him in, and then Paul elevates this principle further and says, hey, you know what you really should do? You should actually go back to your master.
Yeah, I do remember that, yeah.
So in this case, it's told, don't send them back to your master, but Paul sends him back to his master because he wants to go full cycle. Philemon is a Christian now, and he believes the best thing for Onesimus is that he goes back to him and he says, I want you to receive him back not as a slave, but as a brother. So there's that full restitution. So Paul is taking this principle and amping it up on steroids even further.
I love what you're saying there, because what I was going to say here in this context, God is showing how much he hates slavery, how he doesn't tolerate slavery, and the slave becoming the brother. That's full redemption.
That's full redemption.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what that little book of Philemon is all about.
And we're all slaves in a
Yep.
sense, aren't we?
Yep.
We are slavery to, perhaps you're a slave to Bridgerton, but
Perhaps I am.
and when we're set free, God brings us into a new relationship and
Yep.
a new understanding of who we are.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's it. That's the redemptive story. So this is
With new rights and privileges.
privileges. We've seen that for the woman who's been been taken from the enemy camp. We've seen that by the runaway slave. These principles are elevating the dignity of the vulnerable.
So we're seeing a theme, aren't we? We're seeing God's heart, redemption. What other words would you say there?
Yeah, redemption, elevation,
Elevation.
lifting the vulnerable to places of citizenship and value, the importance of God's people treating all other people as equal. It's an equality issue as opposed to what sin does, which is straight away sends people into a caste system where the powerful oppress the weak, the rich oppress the poor. This is the reverse of all.
Yeah.
This is a radical equality.
And what we're seeing as well is what God doesn't like. He doesn't like slavery. He doesn't like people being treated poorly, like bodies discarded. He doesn't like people selling their children into slavery. So he's revealing the good things and also revealing what he doesn't like.
Yeah, that's right. And he's doing a lot of those things that he doesn't like through an implication where sometimes he could come out and say, this is one of the arguments against slavery, God never goes against slavery. God never says slavery is bad, and that's why it took William Wilberforce and all that to come up against the British Parliament to abolish slavery. And they had to show over time, people had to get this implication that while it doesn't say God hates slaves, and it even at times allows for the taking of slaves, you've got to read the underlying principle behind it, which is the way you were to treat your slaves was different to how other people were treated. That's God taking them on a journey towards what would ultimately be emancipation for slaves. 3,500 years later almost.
But God could have said here, do return a runaway slave, but he didn't. Instead, he granted freedom to that slave.
That's right.
Because that's what he really longs for.
And I would be very surprised if someone like William Wilberforce didn't argue that very point you just made.
Oh, well, he and I, we go way back. Okay, next part here. Do you have anything else to offer on that?
Nope.
Okay. So no daughter of Israel is to become a sacred prostitute, and no son of Israel is to become a sacred prostitute. What?
Well, that's temple prostitution, which is pagan worship, where the same thing you said about the emancipation, the emasculation, the eunuchs,
Yeah.
It's the same principle. You're not to turn your children use them for the practice and worship of foreign
Because
pagan
they would have been
gods.
sold,
They
right,
were
as
sold.
well.
Yes, some
sold
were
into-
sold, and some it was a bit
became-
like the eunuch thing. It was a bit like it was an honor, social honor, to have dedicated your daughter to be a temple prostitute.
Yeah, certainly in some religions. Yeah.
Yes. And all the while, those women were being abused. Those daughters were suffering through horrible abuse, but it was seen as social honor, and that's one of the things that God detests.
And don't bring the fee of don't into the house of God, your God, to pay for any vow. Let me read that properly. And don't bring the fee of a sacred prostitute or the earnings of a priest pimp to the house of God, your God, to pay for any vow. They are both an abomination to God, your God. Bringing the fee is an abomination and a vow is an abomination?
A vow to a foreign god is an abomination, yes. But it's saying, I think what it's saying is don't pay for a godly vow with the on the back of money that has been gained through the abuse of another human being. So do not, does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's what it's saying, I think. How could you mix godly vows with practices from other foreign gods where you're saying, oh, I've got some money. I needed some money to make an offering to God, so I've abused somebody else to gain wealth that I can then offer to God. That's what I think God's rebuking here.
Right. I've got this note here. Temple prostitutes were the product of social conditions that the Deuteronomic, yes, laws aim to abolish, in theory, at any rate.
In theory, yeah. Because it's going to say, as again, when you go into this land, do not be like the nations around about you, the nations that are there. And it lists things. They sacrifice their children. They prostitute their children, etc., etc. And it's saying, do not be like them.
And by not doing this, they are set apart and they look like a holy nation.
They look like a holy nation. And they live by a different value system to the nations around them.
Where all is valued.
Yep.
That's hugely different.
It's massively different.
Yeah. So it's hard for us to understand, but that would have looked very, very different if they got it right.
If they got it right. And they didn't. They turned it into, we're better than everybody else. And this is what disappoints me about so much of what I see in the Christian church today, because I think we run the risk of doing the same thing. We're taking these principles and looking down on people who are living by these principles instead of focusing on just living right ourselves, and we end up judging the Ammonites and the Moabites around us rather than recognizing we've got the problem. Maybe we could do well to live by a different standard, and that would be attractive to the broken Ammonites and Moabites out in the world who are trapped in sinful systems and structures, and they're looking for a place where they could experience freedom from that.
I just watched the Simpsons episode the other day. I happened to catch it. I used to watch it all the time, haven't watched in years, but there was this great quote which made me think about the churches where Reverend Lovejoy's wife has gone away. Oh, no, sorry, not Reverend Lovejoy's. Next door neighbour, Ned Flanders' wife has gone away, and Bart thinks that he's murdered her, the whole Rear Window episode. But she comes back and she says, oh, no, he hasn't murdered me. I'm alive. And they say, where were you? And she says, oh, I was just at a church camp learning how to be more judgmental.
That's about right.
I really laughed at that.
That's right. Learning how to be more judgmental.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, moving right along. But that's the point we're making.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, last verse here. When you enter your neighbour's vineyard, you may eat all the grapes you want.
Ah, brilliant.
But don't put any in a bucket or in a bag. And when you walk through the ripe grain of your neighbour, you may pick the heads of grain, but you may not swing your sickle there. What's going on in these verses?
What do you think it's saying?
I think it's saying be generous to the poor and widows amongst you. They can come in and eat their fill. It's looking after your neighbour if they don't have any.
So it's back to the whole principle we said at the start about caring for your neighbour's ox and all that kind of stuff, yeah?
Yes.
Honouring your neighbour's property.
Yeah.
By, in this case, honouring your neighbour's lack of property by allowing your property to be used, your asset to be used for their benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is taking care of the greater community.
Yep. Do you know this principle applies in the UK? There is actually laws in the UK based on this principle. And I discovered this when we went for a walk in the UK through the Scottish Highlands many years back in 2017. It's called the Right to Roam Act. And the Countryside and Rights of Way Act of 2000, it grants the public the right to access certain types of land for recreational purposes. This includes mountains, moors, heaths, downs, and registered common land, often referred to as open access land. It also allows for people to walk through private property on their way to other things. So unlike in Australia where you see the signs that say private property do not enter, the law, if you own a farmland, people are allowed to, as long as they show respect and they walk through your land, they can open the door gates and close the gates. They can walk through private property to get somewhere else. And this whole principle is coming from this sense of what's mine is yours.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? And that's written into British law. And it comes out of this whole concept of use it. It's this trust. I like it because it's a beautiful law that says, I trust you enough to let you on my property, believing that if I trust you enough, you'll do the right thing, which is this little bit of heaven here.
Yeah.
I trust you enough that when you go through my property, hey, take some food, but I trust that you won't come through and take all my cattle and load them up in a truck. I trust that you won't fill up buckets of my grapes and take them away. But if you want to eat some grapes on the way, go right ahead.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful picture of what heaven should look like.
Yeah. It makes me think, is this our communal gardens? Like in Australia, we
a
have
little
those
bit of that, communal gardens.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of that same principle. So there's a little bit of heaven that I love it because it, instead of having all these rules that says do not enter, do not do this, do not. We talked about this when we did sin nature. It's that thing of I'm going to give up my rights for someone else for their benefit. I'm willing to have someone come on my property. I'm willing to open up my house to them. I'm willing to let them have access to my goods in this understanding and trust that they will not abuse that.
Mm. Yeah.
And yet we know that that's the dysfunction of human nature, but it's a little bit of heaven.
A little bit of heaven. Is this the Ruth story here? She goes...
The right of gleaning?
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other stories like that?
Stories? Well, it's written into the Mosaic law, this whole do not harvest right to the edge and let the poor, the warrior, widow and the foreigner take over the gleanings. Do not go back over the grapes once you've done it once. Don't go back over them again a second time. Leave the rest for the foreigner. So that was that little bit of principle.
What about Jesus when he goes and he gets in trouble for doing it on the
Sabbath? He's doing the same thing.
But he's doing the same.
He's doing exactly the same thing. He's walking through the farm and taking some. Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Exactly what Jesus is doing. And that's they're not accusing him of stealing the neighbour's property.
No, they're not.
They're accusing him of working on the Sabbath. So they even recognise that what Jesus is doing, if it happened on Monday to Sunday to Friday, it would have been fine.
Yeah.
It's just the fact that he was doing it on the Sabbath.
That would be good to teach about when you do those passages from the New Testament.
Would be,
come back
it?
to this.
Yeah, come back to here.
This little part.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of hard to understand why he gets in trouble there. You think, oh, yeah, he's doing it on the Sunday or Sabbath, but shouldn't he be getting in trouble for stealing?
Yes, and he's not because he's not seen as stealing. Yeah, that's right. Little bit of heaven.
Yeah, because God's heart is to look after everybody.
Yep, that's right. And it was steeped in this Jewish practice, even in the first century.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, when you get your vineyard, you might be down on your luck now. You can come and eat through mine, and one day you'll get your vineyard, and maybe my crop's not so good, and I can come and eat. Have lunch there.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. What a picture of heaven.
That is a good picture. Let's go. Move on. Chapter 24.
All right, 24.
Now we're going to get into the divorce laws that you
we talked about 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
We just said we've got 2 chapters to go. Let's go.
All right. Okay. So a man marries a woman and then it happens he no longer likes her because he's found something wrong with her. He may give her divorce papers, put them in her hand and send her off. After she leaves, if she becomes another man's wife and he comes to hate her, the second husband also gives her divorce papers and he sends her off, right? Hang on. Gives her divorce papers, puts them in her hand and sends her off. It's important, the put in the hand part, by the way. Sends her off. Or if he should die, then the first husband who divorced her can't marry her again. She's made herself ritually unclean and her remarriage would be an abomination in the presence of the Lord. Abomination is ritually unclean.
Yeah.
Right, okay. And it defiles the land with sin. Are these the laws that was it the Pharisees or Sadducees, I can't remember, talk about with Jesus?
Yes, where they question him on marriage and divorce. Yes, this is what they're referring to specifically.
Specifically, okay. So can you just talk me through these? What's going on
All right,
here?
I'm going to try and do it off the top of my head. I could pause and get it open. Probably be worth doing because I'll be less muffled, but less all over the place. But here we go. There was some conjecture about exactly what divorce was allowed. So in the time of Jesus, there were 2 schools of rabbinical thought about what this scripture was saying. And one of the rabbis, I don't want to remember which one, Rabbi Hillel or Rabbi Shammah or something like that, one of the schools basically interpreted this and it actually went to them as clear as to say in the rabbinical teaching that if a wife burned her husband's dinner, that was grounds for divorce. The other one was much more conservative and I think understood the principle that no, it's not that flippant. You can't just divorce a woman and send her away. And so they have these, when they come to Jesus, they're coming about this rabbinical question. It's well known at the time. It's written in rabbinical teaching at the time. There was these two schools of thought, and they're basically quizzing Jesus on which of these schools of thought they should abide by. And Jesus specifically says, Moses permitted you to give your wives a certificate of divorce because your hearts were hard. So it was the problem in the society. It was men's hard hearts that allowed for this concept of divorce. But then he says, but it wasn't that way from the beginning. For have you not read, in the beginning, God made them male and female, and the two shall become one. So he's trying to show God's original intention was that the marriage unit would be holy and it would stay together. But because of human sin, God allowed for divorce. It's not the ideal, but there are times when it is allowed for the sanity of human beings so that they don't have to live in dysfunctional situations. The problem was that in this, the hyper-liberal view of this, which was just dismiss them and send them away, there was no security for the woman. And that's the context that this is talking about here. It's saying you have a responsibility to provide security for the woman. That's the ideal. And the whole bride price and dowry concept came out of that.
If a man married a woman and then divorced her and then later on remarried her, would that be like an attempt to get a second payment?
Yes, that comes into it too.
Okay. So this is to sort of stop that second payment.
Stop the second payment. Yeah.
Because that could have been abused.
That would have been abused. And sadly, the dowry principle was abused. It would be nice if it wasn't, but it was. Rebecca even says that to Rebecca and Leah and Rachel, not Rebecca. Leah and Rachel say that to Jacob. They say, hey, we might as well come with you because Dad's spent all the money you paid for him anyway. All our dowry. If we stay here, we've got nothing anyway because Dad spent it all. He's abused it. Instead of sticking it in the bank and keeping it as protection for his daughters, he's used it. So that was abused too. And God's trying to show, Jesus is trying to respond that this divorce thing, and it's a highly sensitive subject that warrants its own in-depth conversation because of all the nuance around divorce, and it's been a big issue in the church. It still is in large portions of the church around divorce. I think there's an underlying principle here. We tend to weaponize this divorce argument rather than realizing that it's actually supposed to be there for the protection and elevation and value of humans. It fits the whole context of everything we've been reading in this, if we see it that way, rather than weaponizing divorcees and saying you're less than.
The two schools of thought that you just mentioned, can you imagine the conversation people would have had around that? Like how many hours they would have sat down arguing, saying, well, I should be able to divorce my wife because she looks bad on Sundays,
yes,
or she burnt my food, as you said. They would have spent hours and hours, and the more they talked, the harder their hearts would have become.
That's right.
Yeah, they were looking for that legal excuse to not have responsibility.
Like we talked about when we did our SIB podcast last year, they were looking for the legal excuse as to why they could stay in the time zone longer, the time parking, rather than realising, no, actually I owe it to value my wife and my spouse enough to actually, instead of divorcing them because she burned the dinner, maybe you could think about, well, honey, how could I help you? Maybe I should be sitting around waiting for you to feed me. Maybe I should be helping you.
Yeah.
Going the extra, using your instead of looking for legal loopholes, actually loving your neighbour proactively rather than the opposite, which is just using people for your own benefit and your own gain.
Yeah. And because a lot of marriage would have been about protection, wouldn't it? So basically they're saying, I no longer want to protect that woman.
That's right.
Yet
you hurt me, you don't deserve to be protected. You're out.
But just what we were just talking about in the last chapter with the grapes and going through, those people have been protected. They're being fed and protected. And so much about God's heart is protecting each other, isn't it?
I love that. Can you see why it's important to read these in their context? If you can, even just reading this principle and applying all the surrounding principles we've gained, you realise it takes on a different meaning than being weaponized against people who are divorced.
And God is using this here to expose our hearts, to expose the hard hearts.
Yep.
Isn't it?
Yep.
It's really showing us how far we are from Him.
Yep. It was
Really?
not like this in the beginning. He says, God was. He says Moses gave you the law of divorce as a concession to your hard hearts, is how Jesus put it. So he's basically saying, look, I know that your hearts are hard. We'll create some allowances, but it's not the ideal.
Do you think no, don't worry about that. That was going to go down a big rabbit hole. We don't have the time for that, so we'll just
we'll move on.
Move on. Maybe come back to it another day. But in this, I'm really struck by the woman, I suppose. No choice there at all.
It would appear not.
It appears not.
Yeah.
But that is common in the culture.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We've actually seen that in some of these laws, the women do, you've mentioned it, the woman being able to have a say in the discipline of a son, the women who have been created as equals and brought in from the foreign cultures and able to be a wife and a citizen. So we've already seen that it is over and above the laws around about it, but it's not perfect. In this case, this is one where a man can divorce his wife.
Could in other cultures a woman remarry? Because here it implies she certainly can remarry.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know for sure. I don't know what other cultures would have thought about a divorcee. It would be a cultural thing. So in some cultures, a divorcee would be taboo, so they wouldn't have a chance for remarriage. I'd have to look that up. There's certainly space for remarriage within these cultures, within Jewish culture. So yeah, it's not ideal that the woman got kicked out of the home in the first place, but there's enough dignity to allow for remarriage so that that woman could have some kind of security, emotional and physical and economic security.
Yeah, and redemption. It's not
and redemption
specifically
again. I like
stated,
that. You keep using that word. That's really good.
Redemption. Yeah. And when you put all that in context to the next verse here, when a man takes a new wife, he's not to go out with the army or be given any business or work duties. He gets 1 year off to simply be at home making his wife happy.
You like that?
Putting the two next to each other, it shows you how much God is interested in having healthy relationships, healthy marriages, so that it doesn't result in this divorce. In any,
and I agree with you. I love it. Directly contrasts this concept of men can just use women and abuse them and divorce them when they're ready. It's actually reversing it completely and saying you need to stay home and
make her happy.
Make her happy.
Yeah,
you actually owe it to her. So it's valuing women as opposed to devaluing or abusing them, which is the way this school of rabbinic thought.
Yeah, a whole year off to make her happy.
Yeah.
In my mind, they need about 10 years to make a wife happy. No.
Well, there's a few things that are coming into it economically. You know, I think by and large, it would be if you're off, you can potentially create an heir.
Yes, before you go away
and get killed, you've got an heir. So that's an economic security that I think should be taken here. Yeah, those sorts of things. I'm not saying that every automatically would have happened because the infant birth mortality rate was so high, but you can see the principles at work.
Yeah, you can.
There. Yeah.
And it's about joy too. It wants to create joy in the marriage and give it the best start.
Yeah.
Best chance it has.
Yep, I'm quite happy to spend a year at home if someone wants to allow me to do that.
Only if you take
Only if I'm a new wife. Oh, okay. Well, that's not going to happen.
Well, I have to ask that question. Was it a new wife or was it a never married wife?
Doesn't say. It just says a newly married man.
A newly married man.
Yeah, I don't know. Not sure.
All right, keep going.
Because that could be once again misused and weaponized by a man who just wants to shirk his responsibilities to go to war. He'd just divorce a wife and marry a new one, he'd get a year off, and he'd do that every few years, and he'd never go to war. So I suspect that's not what it's saying.
No.
I suspect it's saying a first-time married man.
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay. So don't seize a hand mill. Next verse 6. Don't seize a hand mill or an upper millstone as collateral for a loan. You'd be seizing someone's very life. These are short little laws here. Mm-hmm. So what is that?
Do you want to read a few of them and see if we can find a common theme?
Okay. If a man is caught kidnapping one of his kinsmen, someone of the people of Israel, to enslave or sell them, the kidnapper must die. Purge that evil from among you. Warning, if a serious skin disease, it changes now, skin disease breaks out, follow exactly the rules set down by the Levitical priests. Follow them precisely. Don't forget what God did to Miriam.
Okay, that didn't work, did it? Because they were all
No.
three kind of. I thought they might have been three related, but they were all
some of
three.
no, if I keep going, they do actually
Okay.
make sense.
Okay,
So
keep
when
going.
you make a loan of any kind to your neighbor, don't enter his house to claim the pledge. Wait outside.
Mm-hmm.
I'll keep going. If the man is destitute, don't use his cloak as a bedroll. Return it to him at nightfall so he can sleep in his cloak and bless you. In the sight of God, your God, this will be viewed as a righteous act. Don't abuse a laborer who is destitute and needy, whether he's a fellow Israelite in your land and your city. Pay him at the end of each workday. He's living mouth to mouth. He needs it now. Hand to mouth, sorry, not mouth to mouth. Parents shall be put to death for their children, not children for their parents. Nor children. Parents shall not be put to death for their children, nor children for their parents. Each person shall be put to death for his own sin. Make sure foreigners and orphans get their just rights. Don't take the cloak of a widow as security for a loan. Don't ever forget you were once slaves in Egypt. When you harvest grain and you forget a sheaf back in the field, don't go back and get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the orphan and the widow. These are all practical, a lot of them, aren't they?
With an underlying principle of how to treat the vulnerable.
Yeah.
Time and again, you
Don't
mentioned.
take the person's right to work, their
Yep.
ability to earn money. Don't
Yep.
take their cloak so that they have something to sleep with. It's all about your daily need.
Yeah, making sure that you actually honour the image of God in others enough not to use them for your benefit, but give up your rights. Even if you're entitled to it because you've loaned them money, don't take it as security. Give it back to them because they need it. So honour them enough to not use them for your purposes.
Yeah. And for example, in these cases here, you have to be like the hand of God to provide for the person who needs something.
I like that. We are the hand of God.
We are the hand of God. Yeah.
Yeah.
God is using us to be a blessing for others.
Yep.
To take care of each other.
to be the ones who bring Jesus' kingdom to earth.
Yes.
Yep. So when we pray, "Your kingdom come," it's actually not just some kind of arbitrary prayer. It's a prayer that it obligates us to be the ones who don't use other people, who honour them, who allow them to walk through our property and respect them and provide for them and so on.
Yeah. And even here, when you shake the olives off your tree, don't go back over the branches and strip them. Leave what's left for the orphan and the widow. And when you cut the grapes in your vineyard, don't take every last grape. Leave.
I think
a bit
I said a few minutes ago, shake the grapes. You don't shake the grapes. You pick the grapes and beat the olives. Yes, that's right.
And multiple times here it reminds you, don't forget you were a slave in Egypt. I command you, do what I'm telling you. Don't forget that you were once a foreigner. You once had nothing. So now treat others kindly. Treat others the way you want to be treated. There's the golden rule.
The golden rule.
Which is, yes. Yeah, these are all, they're all very lovely, really, but this one I want to mention, parents shall not be put to death for their children nor children for their parents.
Each should die for their own sin. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
That, I get how we're responsible for our own sin, the things that we've done, but you know that case in the United States where that terrible guy who broke into a school and shot a lot of people, the parents actually ended up in jail for that.
Okay.
Do you know that case?
No, I don't. Was that because they were shown to be negligent in having guns around the house or something like that?
I don't know the
that wouldn't
full
be the case in America.
details.
Yeah.
But that made me pause and think, that's certainly a new.
That would be a new law.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you could argue that to some degree.
It's a new precedent.
In this case, it would be the opposite. So the precedent in these cultures was if one person in the family committed a crime, there's a good chance the rest of the family are criminals too, so just obliterate the whole lot of them. And it's interesting because even the Jews in the book of Judges, in the book of Joshua, immediately following this, they don't do this. Because when Achan steals a few things from the town of Ai, his whole family suffers for it. When Moses in Numbers, when the sons of Korah come before him, the whole family suffers and is executed for it. So they're not even doing this properly, which shows me it was a standard practice to kill a whole family for the sins of one. And maybe this is God's way of saying that's not how you're supposed to be.
Oh, I'm so glad I mentioned it because I hadn't heard that before. What you're saying, I don't really remember those stories
Yeah.
either.
So Achan or Akan is his name is. When they go to Jericho, they defeat Jericho. Sorry, it's in the town of Jericho. Then they go to town of Ai. So in the town of Jericho, they're supposed to defeat the city and not take anything for themselves. But Achan goes in and he finds a gold robe from Babylonia, and he finds some gold and he finds some stuff and he covets it and he wants it for himself.
Oh, right.
And he takes it
familiar
and
now.
buries it in the ground in his tent.
Yep.
They go and they're not supposed to have done that, and then they go to the next town and they're going to win it easily, and they don't, and story progresses, and the implication is that it's Achan's sin and disrespect that has affected the whole community, just like we're saying here. His sin has affected the wider community, infected the wider community, but in that situation, him and his family are all executed.
Is it written up that God wanted them executed?
Well, it is, and that's the challenge of the violence. That's the ethics that you've got to work out, because it says that Moses asked the Lord, and I think that's what it says, and that they were all executed. Well, you can't have your cake and eat it too, because in this situation, it's saying in the Mosaic law, no, that's not the case. You don't sacrifice the whole family, but in that situation, they seem to have done it. They seem to have thought that God told them not to.
Well, it's not the first time that crimes have been committed in the name of God.
No, and I think this is
nor the last.
So what do we do with God? We see this issue of violence in Scripture. We need to look at it in this progressive context. And just because, I'm going to upset a few people here, because just because the Bible says that God said God said kill this person, or God said do this, does that specifically mean that God said do it because it's in the Bible? And that is the question that we have to ask ourselves. Or could it be that if you take a step back, doesn't mean the word of God isn't inspired, that's an understanding they had of what they believed God was saying to them at the time. It doesn't mean God was saying that. It just means that's what they believed in good faith was the right thing to do, because that was the culture they were in. And over time, God worked with them to show them that it wasn't appropriate.
Yeah. And we have things play out like that in more recent cultures. Well, not so recent, but the Crusades, that was believed to be done because that's what God wanted.
God wanted. Slavery.
The witch hunts.
Yep. The witch trials, yep.
Yeah, witch trials.
Lynchings. All of those things.
And all of these, they're human done. They're human run.
Yeah, and they're done in the name of God.
Yeah.
And they're valid questions to go, well, how could you serve a God like that? But if you can reconcile and go, you know what, God is patient and working with us in our brokenness and bringing us on a journey towards recognizing the lynchings are wrong and so on. That has just taken time, because humans, we're dumb. It takes us time to realize that.
It does take us time.
Yeah.
It takes us a long time to build.
So to sum all that chapter up, it's you will treat and respect the dignity and the image of God in the weaker ones, and you will make sure that you don't abuse them for your purposes. That's, I think, the principle that's at work in all those miscellaneous laws that you just read.
Absolutely. And it is really showing the heart of God, how much he actually cares.
Yeah. Which is why I wanted to do Deuteronomy, because it's actually very useful.
Yeah.
And it informs our legal practices and our
it
values
totally
today.
does. And we're going to talk about that next chapter.
All right, well, let's go there.
In this chapter, we're going to start talking about legal disputes.
Mm-hmm.
So this is law as we know it, legal law.
So this is more like our modern case law and judgments and so on. Okay.
Yeah. So when men have a legal dispute, let them go to court. The judges will decide between them, declaring one innocent and the other guilty. Did other cultures have judges like this?
They would have had delegated authority from their kings, but those judges would have been under the absolute authority of the monarch. But it would have been their systems. But I don't know if you can necessarily automatically overlay a modern Western court system onto these principles. But the principle of someone pronouncing judgment about what is right and wrong, what is legal and illegal, would have been in any culture.
It would have? I'd like to research that. Like, did the Egyptians have that earlier? I don't know. I just always assume Pharaoh says, or the king says, do this.
Yes, but you think about it, it has to be delegated down, because out in the villages, Pharaoh can't be everywhere, so he has delegated structures.
Yeah, if there wasn't
that enforce justice.
Yeah, the culture, the group of people would have made one.
It would have happened, yes, intrinsically, and probably, let's turn that on its head. It's probably not that the group of people would have made one. Think about what happens Here you go. Think about what happens inside a prison system. Who has?
Where do I start?
So when it comes to enforcing what's right and wrong, and who can get away with stuff and who can't, who's going to rise to the surface? The most powerful.
Right. Okay. Not the screws.
Not the screws. So the one with the power, the influence, the ability to take the power is the one who's going to. Power always is going to rise to the surface in the absence of these kind of value systems, which says, actually, if you want to show power, be like Jesus and give up your rights and serve the vulnerable. In the absence of that, the strongest will always rise to the surface.
It's that upside down
kingdom
again.
Yeah. So I think in those situations, you get monarchs. You get a monarch, a king. In a village, you would have someone's going to rise to power within that village who's going to have the authority, and they are probably most likely going to misuse that authority.
Yeah, probably. Chances are very high, actually. All right, so if the guilty one deserves punishment, the judge will have him prostrate himself before him and lashed as many times as his crime deserves, but not more than 40. If you hit him more than 40, you will degrade him to something less than human. So in punishment, there is humanity.
Yeah. For some reason, 40 lashes is the...
How many did Jesus get? We've got no idea,
well,
do we?
We don't know because Roman practice was different.
Yes.
But Paul says, twice I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. So the Apostle Paul was whipped twice by Jews, and it was less than 40 because they were trying to abide by this law. But I don't know what the principle is for. And the Roman lashing was very different to a Jewish lashing. Roman lashing was basically designed to rip the flesh off the body of the victim.
Well, if you've seen that small movie that hardly anybody watched called The Passion
of the Christ.
You might,
yeah, exactly.
you might see that.
You might see that famous
Just
scene.
once or twice.
Yeah, that's one of the most gruesome scenes in the movie. But that's Roman lashing. So the Jewish lashing was not like that. There was because Paul says, I bear in my body the marks of Christ, and he's referring to his lashings. So Paul had whip lashings. Presumably he had 78 of them across his back.
Yeah. And that was just part of it, wasn't it? It's not like Paul protested those lashings. He readily and willingly accepted them.
Yes, I think so. He did. He was about to be whipped by the Romans in Philippi, and he says, "Hey, is it lawful for you to whip a Roman citizen who hasn't been found guilty?" So when he was able to avoid it legally, he did.
Yep.
But in these situations, presumably he had no choice, and he willingly submitted to those whippings because he saw himself as partaking. He says partaking in the death of Christ by doing so.
I've got here a note that says, well, first of all, there was no indication of what crimes deserved this punishment.
Good call.
Yeah.
No right.
indication. So the judge could just choose.
Seems to be something arbitrary about this. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And then my note here, paid the penalty, then received as a brother. What does your translation say there? I don't know where I read that.
Well, that's coming down to verse 5. If two brothers are living together on the same
that's
property.
The next part. Okay.
I think that's what it's the next part.
I've mixed up my note here.
Yeah.
Right. That makes sense.
So I think 1 to 3, which you've just read about the lashings, is one law. And it's not obviously assuming that every sin deserves 39 lashes. It seems to be saying, let the judge make the punishment fit the crime. There's some equality there. So, it might be a 2 lashing punishment as opposed to a 39 lashing punishment. He's trying to, there's some sense in which maybe what God's doing by putting the limitation on it is saying justice has its limits. Don't just execute someone because they did something that was, they stole, they stole a loaf of bread. Don't just execute them for that. It's not a capital punishment. So there's some kind of limitation. It's calling upon the judge to exercise restraint.
And how did they choose the judges?
I think they would have had to have, we're going to see a few different kinds of judges. So the book of Judges is to come after this, 2 or 3 generations after this, the book of Judges comes. And
I imagine they are the judges, though, in that time.
In that context, yeah, they tend to be the people who rule. in the Mosaic law, many of those judgments were actually being made by the priests. They were making the judgments, but that wasn't to be the case ultimately. And when you get into the time of the kings, then what I'm saying, where you've got a hierarchy of system where the king would obviously appoint officials and different regional leaders and so on, and there'll be structures like there is in any society, structures of authority, but ultimately they would have to be appointed by the king. And I'm sure there were times where they abused that right, and if the king found out, they'd probably be out on their ear and someone else would be appointed.
But as Israel goes into the Promised Land and then they go into their tribal areas, they would choose the judges in those areas, wouldn't they? That's why you end up with later on Deborah as a judge and other people as judges.
Yes, correct. Yep.
So we assume they would have been trusted members of society.
They were trusted
and respected.
Yep. Yeah. In an ideal world, yes. Sometimes though the opposite happened, where it was just the powerful one became the authority and they abused their power.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, not always the case, but there would have been times where that was the case.
Yeah. And I skipped ahead before, but we were talking about the brothers just a moment ago. But in between the brothers and this part, there's a little verse here, verse 4. Don't muzzle an ox while it is threshing.
Yep.
Okay.
It seems one, and yet Paul picks this one out of all of them, puts it in the New Testament, and it says, "Hey, this is about how you treat your pastors." That's what Paul says with it. Treat your leaders in the church. Make sure that you feed them so they can feed you. So, could it be that at its face value, it's once again about looking after animals? The ox is working for you, so make sure it's allowed to feed.
Okay, because if you muzzle it, it can't feed.
Yeah. And the irony of it is that if you muzzle an ox so that it doesn't eat, it's probably going to, yes, it might not eat all the grain that you could get, but I wonder if you're going to actually end up with less production because the ox will get hungry, and when it's hungry, it will not work as well.
Yeah,
anyone who does exercise knows they get hungry, and then you'll actually end up with a principle where you'll end up with less, not more, because you haven't been willing to have that margin in your world and care for the ox enough.
Yeah, you've got to be compassionate towards the oxen.
And then Paul will say, do you think it's only about oxen? No, yes. It's actually about
This
leaders.
Is what you wanted to talk about before.
Yeah, that's right. He goes, no, if you don't feed your spiritual leaders, then you are the ones the spiritual leader will be unfed. And because they're unfed, they will not have the energy to be able to feed you.
Exactly.
And it's a principle of reciprocation.
He talks about it twice, right? 1 Corinthians and Timothy, I think.
Yes, I think it is. But I think it is 1 Corinthians, or it was 2 Corinthians. But yes,
it could be 2.
Yep, and Timothy mentions it as well, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And there's also, I think it's in Proverbs 12:10 verse, a righteous man has regard for the life of the animal.
Yeah.
If they've been working all day and they haven't been able to eat, how hard would that be for that poor animal?
Yeah.
And also it could just drop dead at the end of the day from starvation and being tired.
So it's a stewardship issue of other animals. Treat animals well. I like that. Righteous man has regard for the animal.
Yeah.
I like that.
And if God is concerned about an ox, how much more is he about you?
Yes, and Jesus says even God is concerned about the sparrows or the lilies in the field. How much more concerned is he about you?
Then it moves on to the brothers and living together. So when they're living together and one of them dies without having a son, the widow of the dead brother shall not marry a stranger from outside the family. Her husband's brother is to come to her and marry her and do the brother-in-law's duty by her. The first son that she bears shall be named after her dead husband, so his name won't die out in Israel. This is called Levirate marriage.
Law of Levirate marriage.
Levirate marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that a bit more?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? It's just the story of Ruth and Boaz.
Ah, yes.
This is where it's applied. So in order to maintain family...
And Tamar and Judah I've got here.
Yeah, same with Tamar and Judah. Same principle, yep. So once again, it's that in order to maintain that family integrity, the name, the estate, to make sure that it didn't get transferred within a community, this principle was put in place as an economic principle that says this widow could be out on the street, but no, the younger brother, the brother of the man who has died, is now responsible for taking up that economic responsibility and providing for that woman and honouring his brother enough to say, I'm willing to give up my rights and my firstborn child will actually be the firstborn child and maintain the family name of my older brother.
Responsibility, community, caring.
Thinking about bigger than your own little world.
And the firstborn thing, I have to go watch that podcast that you're talking about.
It's several episodes. Yes, it'll help.
The firstborn son.
Yep.
Because why is this important to God? Or is it important to God?
There's probably a deeper answer than what I'm about to say, but at first thought, I think what God is trying to show is back where we started right at the beginning of this episode, is that God is trying to show that the value of the whole of the community is all of our responsibility. It's not just about me taking from the tree of it good and evil and taking what I want. I exist within a society, within a community, within a family, in any kind of body of people. I exist and add value to that wider community. And I think there are many cultures that get that more than Western culture gets that, because we have become hyper individualistic. And if we could grasp some of this, the way I live, I have a corporate responsibility beyond my own comfort that will make the society flourish. And in the same way that if I don't tread out an ox, if I don't muzzle the ox, I'll actually benefit from the entire society flourishing in the long run.
Is anybody redeemed in this story? Or not story, but in this law?
It's the woman who is redeemed, I think, in this particular story.
Yeah.
I think it's
Woman's
the widow.
Redeemed.
The widow is redeemed.
And the line of the firstborns, original husband.
Yes, the line of that's right. So, and it actually uses the word redeemer. The kinsman redeemer is the term that Boaz is. He's the kinsman redeemer to Ruth. And it's not just about Ruth. That story about Ruth is not, it's actually about Naomi and Elimelech. It's the fact that Boaz steps in for Elimelech, because when Ruth finally has a baby, they say God has given Naomi a child.
Yes, yeah.
Even though it's actually her grandchild and it's her foreign daughter-in-law's child, it actually, the full circle, Naomi has gone from being a poor widow, bitter Mara widow. She has been fully redeemed through the faithfulness of Ruth and Boaz, and her family line, her husband's family line, continues now.
And in that story, there's two redemptions.
There is Ruth and Naomi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other story of redemption is the Tamar and Judah one, right? And did you say they were direct descendants of who? So
maybe Tamar was a foreign woman. I just can't remember that. I'd have to look it up. It's Genesis 38.
Yeah, it is.
Genesis 38. It's weird. It's out of context. You read Genesis 38, you could take it out and it wouldn't affect the story, but it's whacked in the middle there.
Is she a descendant of Jesus?
Yes, she's a descendant of Jesus. So Judah, one of Jacob's sons, he has two sons. Their names are Perez and Zerah. Perez marries Tamar. No, that's not right. That's not the names of the sons. That's Tamar's sons' names, Perez and Zerah.
Yeah.
I got that wrong. Backtrack. Judah has two sons. What are their names? Does it say?
Hang on, I'm reading. You keep talking.
Okay.
Judah refuses to marry Tamar.
So Judah has two sons. The first son dies. Then this law of levirate marriage, even though it's not actually applied at this, because this is the story in Genesis 38 predates Deuteronomy.
Okay. Sorry, go on.
Okay, you'll come back to it. So the first son dies. The younger son marries Tamar, but he refuses his it's not called law of levirate marriage. It was obviously not, it was a practice at the time. He refuses to do it. So every time he sleeps with her, he refuses to impregnate her. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
He refuses to impregnate her.
I know the story now.
This seemed to be a sin in the eyes of the Lord because he wasn't honoring his dead brother. And so because of that, the younger son died too. So now Tamar has no other opportunities to be redeemed. Judah promises to do it and make sure it happens, and he refuses. He shirks that responsibility. So Tamar decides, the only way I'm going to be able to do this is I'm going to pretend I'm a prostitute and I'm going to seduce Judah himself, my father-in-law, into having intercourse with me. He falls for that trick and he impregnates her with twins, as it so happens. And then he finds out she's been a prostitute. He's ready to kill her until he realizes that, no, actually, I was the one who
such a charming man.
It's such a charming man. It's such a screwed up story. But in the middle of this, that's that principle at work of maintaining integrity and really in that situation, you could argue that Tamar was wrong for prostituting herself, but actually Judah will even say that she was more righteous than I because I didn't fulfill my rights and responsibilities as the father-in-law, and she's had to do it herself. And so his sinfulness has forced her into prostitution, and that is the most common way most women end up in prostitution today. Not because they choose to go into it, but because society has forced them into it.
That's true. Yeah, or sold into it.
Or sold into it. So yes, exactly.
Yeah. So in the case of Tamar, however you say it, she was redeemed when he does marry her. And it's interesting to me that the Redeemer, Christ, comes from these two stories of redemption.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
God used it in a big way.
Like I said, Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth.
Yeah.
The other one is Mary. 3 of the 4 women. You could argue all 4 were disreputable in society, and yet that's the redemption of God, that he called them all and brought them all into his family.
Doesn't actually say here who Tamar was.
No.
Doesn't say.
My assumption has always been that she was a
Israelite.
Well, she can't have been an Israelite. Well, because there wasn't. It was Jacob and his sons, so she must have been a foreigner, unless it's one of his other brother's wives.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, she's gonna be a foreigner, definitely. She's gonna be a Canaanite of some kind or other, living in the land. Yeah, she can't be a Jew. Because the Jewish nation's only at its early stages. There's less than 70 Jews at this point.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, so she's a foreigner as well.
Yeah, foreigner. God redeems. He has big plans.
Yes,
doesn't he?
He's
He brings
grand
them
in
in
his
upside down
redemptive
kingdom. All right, where were we? We were still going on about those laws, weren't we? Oh, here's the thing: the leaders will. If a brother doesn't want to marry his sister-in-law, she is to go to the leaders of the city and she says, my brother-in-law refuses to marry me. He won't agree to his duty. Then the leaders will call for the brother and confront him. If he stands there defiant and says, I don't want her, his sister-in-law is to pull his sandal off his foot, spit in his face and say, this is what happens to the man who refuses to build up the family of his brother. His name in Israel will be Family No Sandal.
Family No Sandal. That's an interesting way to put it.
She has a lot of power in that moment, though.
Yeah, because it's so significant that this woman is given the right to shame the man for not fulfilling his duty.
The shame is always upon him, not her. Yeah. She can still go and marry somebody else, but he's the shamed one.
Which is what happens in Ruth's story, because Boaz says, I will redeem, but there is one who is closer than I am, and if he doesn't do it, I vow that I will do it. And the man in that story who is closer, he in Ruth chapter 4, he says, yeah, I'll redeem her. And then Boaz says, yeah, but of course you need to realize that the moment you do that, your estate is actually going to belong to Elimelech. He goes, oh, I can't do that. I might damage my own estate. Yeah, and there is a bit of a public shaming takes place there because a little bit of this happens. She takes the sandal off and transacts it. So it's a sort of fulfillment of this story. And then Boaz marries Ruth and they live happily ever after that.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't realize the sandal was in the actual story.
Yeah, it is in the story, and it comes from here. Yeah.
Gosh, we need to read them more in
context. It doesn't look like it's quite so implied, but as this transaction takes place, they remove the shoe and pass it over.
Yeah. And we before I mentioned it was important the woman was given the papers, but I never brought that back. But it was a significant thing that she had that power in her hand as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And there's no mention that Ruth spits in his face. It may or may not have happened, but there's no mention of that in Ruth's story. But it's more that there's this transaction where he has to suffer the shame of going, I didn't redeem Ruth.
Yeah,
so in his
town,
his family no sandal in his town. But he's chosen to suffer that redemption, that shame so that he doesn't endanger his own estate by somehow handing over his estate to Ruth's child.
It is a big shame because it shows that he's not community minded. He doesn't care for the widow, the poor.
Exactly.
Yeah, a lot of stigma.
A lot of stigma. And once again, it's the same thing of we're to give up our rights for the benefit of the community. That has implications for church life.
Kingdom come, your will be done. Kingdom, yes.
Indeed.
Okay. Now here's a verse that does have me scratching my head. When two men are in a fight and the wife of the one man trying to rescue her husband grabs the genitals of the man hitting him, you are to cut off her hand. Show no pity. Wait, what?
It's got to be related to this importance of the genitals being the reproductive power. It has to be. It's the only thing that makes any sense to me. The value that God places on reproduction within a community.
I don't know how many women would have wanted to have done that.
No, that's right. Well, they teach women how to do that for self-defense.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Well, kick, not grab.
Yeah.
You don't want to get that close.
Kick, punch, grab, whatever you can do to protect yourself or whatever. I wonder if that's part of what it is. It's trying to say, once again, it's valuing the reproductive organs.
Here's something that I didn't know when I read it.
Tell me more.
So read the part here, you are to cut off her hand. We read that literally, don't we?
Yeah, I would, but that would bother me reading it literally, yeah.
What else do you think that could mean?
I don't know, but it could be, is it metaphorical, referring to something else?
Yes.
Okay, what is it referring to?
Just let me find my actual passage here. Was it 25:11?
11, yep.
Okay, these notes here say this is the only passage in the Old Testament laws that specifies mutilation as a punishment for an offence, although it is implied in the law of talion, eye for an eye. You know that one, Exodus and Deuteronomy.
Yep.
Jewish interpretation took the passage to be referring to a monetary fine.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
A similar Middle Assyrian law assumes that a woman has damaged a man's testicles in a brawl with him, in which case she is to lose a finger. A male's sexual potency, both for his own self-esteem and for preventing his family from dying out, this is the possible link with the preceding law, says, was regarded as sufficiently important in the Deuteronomic legislation to want to deter a woman from even attempting to catch hold of a man's testicles in defense of her husband.
Yep.
So what you
so
were
what
saying
I was saying,
there,
yep.
Yeah, but when I read that here,
a monetary
to cut off her hand is actually, it's a fine. She will be fined if she does that. It's not that she's going to literally have her hand cut off. It's a monetary, it's a
And
fee,
that is coming back to me because I've heard the Bible Project talk about, I don't know if it's about that, but numbers of these laws, what they'd say is that even with things like capital punishment or severe punishment, there is scope for those things to be replaced by monetary restitution.
Yes. So an eye for an eye wasn't
literally
an eye for an eye. It was value to value.
Value for value. That's right.
And we've seen that already. Man's life, heifer.
Yes, exactly. Value for value.
Value for value.
Yeah, and I think that's what it was saying. So it's using language that we might take literally, but is really just showing value for value.
Yeah, so we have to read that and think, what does it mean? Don't just mean
going cutting off hands.
No, we know that there are some religions out there that they do those things literally, but this is not implied in this Jewish text, and Jewish scholars knew it at the time.
They knew even then. It's not just that we're trying to soften it now, liberalize it now. No, they knew at the time that that's not how it was done. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, very good.
Okay, keep going. Don't carry around with you two weights. This is really important, this one heavy and the other light. This is verses 13 to 16. And don't keep two measures in hand. Basically, have an honest and true weight. One measure, a true honest measure, so you will live a long time in the land of God, your God, because dishonest weights and measures are an abomination to God. All this corruption in business deals
is detestable to God.
Yes. Is detestable.
Because it disrespects the value of other people.
See the scale there? You can imagine the scale.
Yep.
This is where we get our legal system from.
Yep. It's from the Greek. What's the Greek god?
Which one?
The Greek goddess, the one who is the one with the scales in the statues.
Not Dionysus.
No, it's not. So do you know what? Because she's blindfolded.
Oh.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Just Google it.
Okay.
Well, I'm talking about. She's blindfolded, which is the picture is around fair justice. So the scales is this measurement of justice and weight.
Themis,
that's it. Can you find her? Is she
I have her here, the Greek goddess Themis, she's depicted holding a pair of scales, symbolizing her role as the personification of divine law, order, and justice. I don't see her
It might be in the American
blindfolded.
judicial system in the logo or something. There's something about she's blindfolded, which is this way of saying I'm being impartial. I'm not deliberately bringing injustice. I'm going to be fair in my justice.
Yes,
it's something
the symbols
like that.
the scales are a symbol of her impartiality and fairness, as she is said to weigh the evidence with an even hand without bias or prejudice.
Okay, I thought there was something about eyes in there as well, blind. But anyway,
Yeah. This is very important to Judeo-Christian law.
yeah,
And
it
our
still
laws
is
today.
Our laws today. Yeah.
And look, God is about fair business,
Yep.
fair weights, fair scales, honesty.
Yep.
That is the heart of
And
God.
why is it? Because every human being deserves value.
Yeah.
So Jesus, talk about the upside down kingdom, Jesus tells a parable about, which seems at first like it's unfair, about the workers in the vineyard. And the guy comes along and says, hey, go and work in my vineyard for a day's wage. And they go and work at the beginning of the day. And then as the day goes on, go and they work and the last group only work for an hour and they get paid a full day's wage. And it seems like it's unfair. But Jesus' answer is actually trying to produce this principle, saying, friend, you agreed to work for a day's wage. Shouldn't I have the right to do what I want with my wages? And it could be seen as he's stealing from the ones who've worked all day. But what he's actually doing is inverting the kingdom and going, I value the weaker ones, the vulnerable ones, enough to work for them, to give them the same as what those who work all day. So Jesus has once again turned the kingdom value on its head.
Yeah. I love that. I love how God is so caring here.
Yeah.
True and honest weight. Not your body weight.
No.
Weight,
Yes,
scales.
weights,
yeah.
yes.
True and honest scale.
Yeah, well, you
One
can see how
measure.
quickly this could be corrupted. You go into the market to buy, I'll give you some seed if you give me some eggs and
Yes.
all this kind of stuff, and how quickly it could have been corrupted. And Jesus rebuked the temple. This is what the temple money changers were doing. They weren't using fair and honest weights. They were exacting usury. And in the law, in the Mosaic law, is a strict rule that says they cannot charge interest to their brethren
Yeah. I've read that.
for the
yeah.
same principle.
Yeah. And this here is every day people would go to the market. So every day you see those scales there.
Yep.
Every day you should be reminded that God is interested in your business dealings. He's interested in your honesty and integrity. And he has a heart for all people.
Yep, that's it.
That's what that little law did.
Little law
Yeah.
shows you that.
And here, the last few verses, don't forget what Amalek did to you on the road after you left Egypt. Who's Amalek?
The Amalekites.
The Amalekites, yes.
These are the ones that Moses had
I
his
have a
hands
note
up
about
in the
this.
air.
Yes. Okay. Don't forget what Amalek did to you on the road after Egypt, how he attacked you when you were tired. We were talking about this before, and you were unable to put one foot in front of the other. He had no regard for God. And when God, your God, gives you rest from the enemies that surround you in the inheritance land God, your God, is giving you to possess, you are to wipe the name of Amalek from the earth. Don't forget. Yeah, this is what we were just talking about, the Amalekites before.
Yep. And this is the story that will cost Saul his kingdom, because Saul is called to bring this justice about for the Amalekites and he doesn't do it properly.
Yeah.
But that's a different story.
Well, what were you going to say?
No, it's a different story, but it comes from this same principle here about the Amalekites. But what were you going to say?
Well, the Amalekites, they're only really known through the biblical record.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And
Because they were a tribal
Yeah.
people, a
And what-
nomadic people.
Yep, and what they did to the weak and the sick stragglers was so egregious. It was unforgivable.
Yep.
So that's why you say God, not you, but the Bible, God himself promised the destruction of Amalekite because they were very unkind.
It's the Amalekites, they're the ones that Gideon goes up against too, I think.
Multiple people go up against them. They're always going up against
Yeah.
them.
Until,
David goes up against them, doesn't he?
well, Saul, yeah, David probably does too. So Saul was supposed to deal with him and he didn't. But yeah, so my understanding is the Amalekites were a nomadic people who would just sweep through the land and pillage and take all the flocks for themselves and basically, you imagine you see it in the movies, coming through on their horses, just killing all the people in the villages and just taking their crops for themselves, and they're moving on to the next one, which is the exact opposite of what God's trying to set up here in the law, which is respect for the others. There was no respect, and that's what God was not tolerating.
So this little verse here, you are to wipe the name of Amalek. That's the king of the Amalekites.
Not the king, the original descendant.
Original descendant.
Amalek,
Okay.
yeah.
From the earth. I read this really cool little story that it says that Jewish sages, they instituted an ingenious way for this final commandment to be carried out. Haman, do you remember in
Yes,
the
he
story
was an
of
Amalekite.
Esther? Yes. Haman, the enemy of the Jews in the Esther story, is called an Agagite and sins. And wait a minute, I'm spelling a typo in my notes. And Agag was the king of the Amalekites.
At the time of Samuel and Saul, that story I was talking about.
Okay, so it's reasoned that Haman was Amalekite. But in order to blot the name of the Amalekite as the text commands, when the story of Esther is read out as a part of Purim, all sorts of noise and shouting is to be made so that when they read that part of the story, you don't actually hear his name being stated.
That's cool.
And his name is just wiped out.
That's cool because I know that they go boo and all this sort of stuff
Yeah.
when they say it. Yeah.
So they take that one very literally, probably to this day. I don't know.
Well, they do. When they tell the story at Purim, all the little kids are supposed to, every time Haman's name's mentioned, they're supposed to go boo.
Yes,
yeah,
there
exactly.
you go. Now you know why. To
that's
wipe his name out
to wipe
from
his
history.
name out. Oh, there you
off
go.
the earth. Don't forget. They take that one. Don't forget.
Don't forget. Wow. There's more to that story. We won't go into it.
No.
As to how Saul's story there links in with Haman's story, because Haman wouldn't have even existed if Saul had have wiped out the name of the Amalekites.
Yeah, right.
And it took. There's more to that story. How does it work? Because Esther is from Mordecai. Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin, and so Benjamin through Mordecai is showing grace. I think there's a redemptive component to the story there. I can't remember how it all fits together. I have to think it through. But there's a redemptive component to that story as well, and it all links to Saul's disobedience for not wiping out the name. Now, I want to say, when it says wipe out the name, there's a lot of these laws in Moses and Joshua. They talk in absolutes here. And you can automatically think it's saying completely obliterate them, kill them all, right? And it seems to say that. But in the same sentence, it will say, but don't intermarry with them. So it'll say completely obliterate the Amalekites and the pagan nations that you're going to go to, but don't intermarry with them. Well, which is it? Do we obliterate them or do we don't intermarry?
Yeah, right.
We've just read here about how you can not just read 3.5 hours ago, how you can take you could actually take a woman from a foreign country and take them in. Well, you haven't completely obliterated them. This is common rhetoric in the nations around about it when we say, we wiped them out and didn't leave a survivor. It didn't mean that. It just meant that they were removed from power. And very often what would happen is that they would be integrated. They would surrender and they would become Jews. They would integrate into the society. So we mustn't see this as automatically meaning every person, male, woman, child, everyone was always killed. It wasn't always that way.
And you also need to think about the words here. That was an abomination before the Lord. That seems to be said a lot.
It does, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
And we need to think about what that means. And I think it would probably be just been said by everybody. What you're doing is an abomination to the Lord. Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily an abomination. It's just...
It's almost like a rhetorical device that they would use. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And where's the heart of God in this? I think it's very obvious to me that God will not forget the widow, the poor, the brokenhearted, the downtrodden. Yep. He will bring judgment in his day.
Yep. He will uphold the cause of the weak. And
where the names may not be wiped off from earth, the pain will be one day wiped off from earth.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Are we done?
We're done.
We made it.
Yes.
Wasn't too bad, Jeanie.
Wasn't
You're worried
too
this is
bad.
going to be the longest one ever. Wasn't too painful. Well, we're going to leave it there, folks. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you, Jeanie.
Yeah, thanks for
Good
listening.
conversation.
Yeah, I love this. Don't get me started on the Old Testament. I love it.
No, you were saying in a break there that the Old Testament's where you spend most of your time, like getting in depth.
Yeah.
All right, God bless you. Thanks for being with us today, everyone. We'll talk to you on the next episode.